Good evening, my sleepy historians. Before we drift into tonight's story, tell me, where are you listening from? What city, what country, and what time is it right now as you're settling down? If you enjoy these journeys into forgotten corners of history, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. It helps us keep this little community of dreamers alive. Now, close your eyes, take a breath, and imagine the vast American frontier. A land of wide skies, dusty trails, and wooden towns built almost overnight. When we picture the Wild West, we often think of sheriffs with tin stars, outlaws with revolvers, and cowboys riding into the sunset. But there was another, quieter force shaping life out there: brothels. More than just places of forbidden pleasure, these houses of ill repute were part of the fabric of frontier life. They were businesses, social hubs, and even, strangely enough, stabilizing forces in a world where everything else felt transient and uncertain. So tonight, as you drift into rest, let's explore how brothels shaped the towns, the people, and even the legends of the American frontier. Picture a mining camp in the 1850s, somewhere in the Rocky Mountains or along the dusty California gold fields. At first, it is nothing more than a scattering of tents, a few log cabins hammered together with rough boards, and men, dozens, sometimes hundreds of men, prospectors, drifters, gamblers, cowhands. Women, however, are almost entirely absent. And in that absence, an opportunity arises. The first brothels of the frontier were often nothing more than canvas tents or single-room shacks with straw-stuffed mattresses on the floor. A lantern hung from a nail, a wooden crate serving as a chair, and a curtain for privacy. Primitive, temporary, but profitable. The women who came were not always who you might expect. Some had been waitresses, laundresses, or theatre girls in cities back east. Others were widows, immigrants, or women abandoned on the trail westward. The frontier gave them few respectable choices, but in the world of the brothel, they found, if not safety, at least survival. And for the men, these places were more than sites of transaction. Imagine the loneliness of the prospector. Months without hearing a woman's voice. Imagine the cowboy, riding from ranch to ranch with no family to greet him at the end of the day. Inside the brothel's lamplit parlor, he could sit, talk, be called by his name, and for a few hours forget that the world outside was so barren and cruel. Thus, from the earliest days of frontier settlement, the brothel stood alongside the saloon and the general store as one of the first permanent institutions of any new town. A strange kind of anchor in a drifting, lawless landscape. As frontier towns grew, something curious happened. For all their reputation as dens of sin, brothels quietly became part of the economic foundation of these settlements. Think of it this way. When a new town rose out of the dust, it needed revenue to build streets, schools, even a sheriff's office. And where could that money come from in a place full of transients and drifters? More often than not, it came from the brothels. Owners paid license fees, fines, and unofficial donations to local governments. In some towns, taxes on brothels and saloons made up a significant portion of the budget. The money might have come from whispered transactions in velvet-draped rooms, but it ended up paving roads, paying judges, and keeping the lights burning in the town hall. But their role was not only financial, they shaped social life too. Many brothels had parlors with pianos, card tables, and plush sofas. Men came not just for intimacy, but for conversation, for the sound of music, for the illusion of elegance in otherwise rough surroundings. And the women themselves? They became some of the best-informed people on the frontier. News travelled faster through brothel parlors than through newspapers. Politics, rumours, business deals, all filtered through these smoky, lamplit rooms. A clever madam might know more about the town's future than its mayor. It was not unusual for brothels to sponsor events, dances, holiday parties, even charity drives. Orphans' homes, hospitals, and churches sometimes benefited, ironically, from money that respectable society pretended not to touch. And yet, this was the paradox. Respectable families disapproved of the women, but their towns quietly depended on them. Brothels were both shunned and relied upon, hidden in plain sight, like a guilty conscience built into the very framework of frontier life. Who were the women behind the lace curtains and lamplit parlours? The truth is complicated. Some were desperate, immigrants who had lost everything, widows left behind on the trail, or young girls fleeing abusive homes. Others were adventurous spirits, tired of factory work in eastern cities, drawn westward by the promise of gold and quick fortunes. A few even chose the life deliberately, preferring the independence and income it offered compared to marriage or domestic service. But whatever their beginnings, life in a brothel was rarely easy. Picture a woman in her 20s, dressed in a silk gown that might once have been elegant in New Orleans or San Francisco, now faded from travel and wear. She sits in a parlour, her cheeks rouged, her smile carefully practiced. She entertains cowboys and miners, gamblers and drifters. Some are kind, others rough. And always in the background, the risk of disease, violence or abandonment lingers like a shadow. Yet within this hardship, some women rose to remarkable positions of power. The madams, women who owned or managed brothels, could become wealthy, even influential. They chose which women to hire, set rules for conduct, and often dealt directly with lawmen and town leaders. A successful madam might have finer furniture than the local judge, chandeliers imported from the East, and velvet drapes shielding her parlour windows from prying eyes. Famous names began to circulate. Julia Bulette of Virginia City, revered by miners and mourned like a queen at her death. Madame Moustache, known for her sharp tongue and sharper business sense. Women like these were part celebrity, part entrepreneur, and part outlaw, all at once. For many of the working women, camaraderie softened the edges of hardship. Inside the brothel they formed bonds, sisters in survival, sharing clothes, secrets, and whispered hopes of someday leaving. Some managed to save money, marry, and step into respectable life. Others never escaped. Theirs was a world of contradictions, at once glamorous and tragic, exploitative, yet strangely empowering. And their presence on the frontier gave shape to the very towns that often tried to pretend they didn't exist. On the American frontier, law was never a constant. In one town, brothels might be tolerated, even quietly supported, while in another, they were raided, fined, or forced to the edges of society. Sheriffs and marshals walked a delicate line. Officially, their duty was to uphold the law, but unofficially, many relied on the fines and bribes collected from brothels to fund their offices. A raid might be staged for appearances. The women marched through the street to the jailhouse, only to be released the next morning after paying a fee. In this way, law enforcement turned vice into revenue. But the danger went far beyond legal harassment. Violence lurked constantly in the shadows. Drunken cowboys could turn aggressive. Gamblers cheated of their winnings might blame the women. Rival brothels sometimes fought for territory, their disputes spilling into the streets. And when outbreaks of disease swept through a town, brothels were often the first to be blamed, whether fairly or not. Imagine a frontier street at night. The piano in a saloon plays ragged tunes. Laughter drifts into the cold air, and lanterns flicker in brothel windows. Suddenly, a gunshot cracks the silence. A drunken quarrel erupts, perhaps over a woman, perhaps over a game of cards, and the entire town is reminded how fragile the balance of order really is. Some madams kept hired guards, often former gunfighters or bouncers from saloons, to protect their women. Others relied on carefully negotiated relationships with local sheriffs, judges, or even politicians. The more successful a brothel was, the more it became entwined with the machinery of local power. And so, frontier justice was often uneven. A drunken brawl between miners might end in a funeral and a shrug. But if the reputation of a prominent brothel was at stake, the entire town might suddenly demand swift punishment, not out of morality, but out of economics. In the end, the law on the frontier treated brothels not so much as moral problems, but as business arrangements to be managed. They were at once condemned, tolerated, and exploited, a mirror of the frontier itself, where survival always came before ideals. For all their scandalous reputation, brothels often became something more than dens of sin. In many frontier towns, they were unexpected centers of culture, gossip, and even charity. Step into the parlor of a well-established house. A piano stands in the corner, its keys worn smooth from nightly songs. The women sing popular tunes of the day, ballads from New Orleans, sentimental waltzes from Europe, even the occasional hymn remembered from childhood. Men gather not only to spend their wages, but also to hear music, to play cards, to drink something finer than the watered whiskey of a saloon. And in these lamplit rooms, information travelled faster than in the newspapers. A miner boasting of a strike, a rancher whispering of cattle prices, a gambler spilling secrets after too much whiskey. By morning, the madam and her girls knew the movements of money, politics, and power in the town better than most businessmen. Sometimes this influence reached surprising places. A madam might warn a sheriff of brewing trouble. A gambler might trust a courtesan with a secret deal. Even local politicians occasionally sought advice or funds from women whose very existence they condemned in public. But perhaps the most surprising role brothels played was in charity. Hospitals, orphanages, even churches occasionally found themselves funded by money, raised through benefit dances or quiet donations from madams. Many respectable citizens refused to acknowledge where the gold came from, but when an orphan needed shoes or a church roof needed repair, the brothel's coin box often opened more readily than the town council's treasury. It was this strange duality that defined brothels on the frontier. To some, they were shameful blights. To others, they were pillars of survival, community, and even generosity. In truth, they were both scandal and sanctuary, vice and virtue, all wrapped in velvet curtains and the glow of lantern light. The frontier was full of legends, gunfighters, sheriffs, and outlaws whose names filled dime novels. But in the quieter margins of those same towns, madams and their brothels were weaving legends of their own. Take Julia Boulette of Virginia City, Nevada. She was no ordinary madam. Beloved by the miners of the Comstock Lode, Julia dressed in elegant gowns, rode in parades, and donated generously to local charities. She nursed the sick during epidemics and supplied fire brigades with water and blankets. When she was murdered in 1867, the entire town mourned her as if she had been royalty. Miners wept openly, and her funeral procession stretched through the streets like that of a beloved leader. Or consider Mattie Silks of Denver. Known for her fiery red hair and equally fiery temper, she ran one of the city's most successful houses. Mattie was wealthy, shrewd, and fearless. She even fought a public duel, yes, pistols at dawn, against another madam over the affections of a gambler. Both women missed their shots, but the story cemented Mattie's place in frontier folklore. Then there was Madame Moustache, a Frenchwoman whose name came from the dark hair on her upper lip. She was a gambler as much as a madam, famous in mining camps from California to Nevada. Her parlour was a mix of cards, whiskey, and women, and her sharp wit made her both feared and admired. And in towns like Dodge City, Deadwood, and Tombstone, brothels became as legendary as the saloons. Some were gilded palaces with chandeliers and velvet wallpaper. Others were little more than shacks on the edge of town, yet both types carved themselves into the memory of the West. What's striking is how often these women achieved a kind of independence rare in their time. They owned property, controlled money, and commanded respect, even if that respect was given reluctantly. In a society that confined most women to kitchens and parlours, madams stood apart, controversial, scandalous, but undeniably powerful. These famous figures remind us that the story of the frontier was not written only by men with guns, but also by women with courage, charm, and the to survive in a world that gave them very few choices. As the 19th century turned into the 20th, the Wild West began to fade. Towns that were once little more than muddy streets and saloons grew into cities with banks, schools, and courthouses. With that growth came something else, respectability. And respectability rarely left room for brothels. Reform movements swept across America. Churches and women's organizations launched campaigns against vice, preaching that houses of ill repute were dens of disease, immorality, and corruption. Posters warned of white slavery, a sensational term used to describe the fear of young women being forced into prostitution. Newspapers ran stories of ruined families and public scandal. At the same time, science began to catch up with what the women already knew, the dangers of disease. Syphilis and other infections spread rapidly in frontier towns, and public health officials pushed for stricter regulations. Some towns introduced medical inspections, others demanded closure altogether. Then came the arrival of new laws. The Mann Act of 1910, meant to combat trafficking, gave federal authorities the power to prosecute. Prohibition in the 1920s further cracked down on saloons and brothels alike, stripping away the shadows in which they had once thrived. One by one, the famous red light districts were shut down, the glittering parlors of Denver, the infamous cribs of Dodge City, the crowded houses of San Francisco's Barbary Coast. All fell silent. Some were demolished, others quietly converted into boarding houses or shops, their past whispered about but never openly acknowledged. And yet, the memory lingered. Brothels had shaped towns, funded schools, hosted music, and given thousands of lonely men a strange kind of solace. By the time reformers declared victory, the frontier brothel had already written itself into history. Today, if you walk the old streets of Virginia City, Deadwood, or Tombstone, you may pass a weathered wooden building, its windows shuttered, its paint peeling. Tour guides might tell you it was once a dance hall or a boarding house, but behind the polite words, the truth remains. These were once the brothels that gave the frontier its peculiar mix of sin and survival. And so, dear listener, we come to the end of our journey through the brothels of the American frontier. When we think of the Wild West, it is easy to picture shootouts, dusty cattle drives, and stern-faced sheriffs. But behind the myths and the legends, there were always quieter forces at work, forces of survival, resilience, and contradiction. Brothels were one of those forces. They were places of hardship, yes, but also of community. They generated revenue for towns, gave companionship to lonely men, and offered women, however imperfectly, a measure of independence in a world that offered them few choices. They were both condemned and needed, shunned and relied upon. The women who lived in them were neither simple villains nor simple victims. They were complex, resourceful, often tragic, but always part of the frontier's living heartbeat. In their lamplit parlors, history was written in whispers, laughter, and music drifting into the night. Now, as you rest, imagine one of those towns at dusk, a piano playing faintly through open windows, boots clattering on wooden boardwalks, a lantern swinging in the evening breeze. The town is alive, shaped not just by lawmen and gunslingers, but also by the women behind the velvet curtains. History is rarely tidy, rarely moral in the way we might wish. But it is always human. And on the American frontier, brothels were part of that human story, woven into the very fabric of the West. Close your eyes for a moment and imagine stepping out of the cold night air of a frontier town and into the warm glow of a brothel parlor. Outside, the wind carries dust along the unpaved street. The boards creak under your boots as you push open the door, and suddenly the world changes. Inside, the light is golden, filtered through oil lamps and candles that flicker against wallpaper patterned in reds and golds. The smell is thick, kerosene smoke, the sweetness of cheap perfume, the musk of whiskey spilled onto wooden tables. In the corner, a piano plays a tune just slightly out of tune, the kind of ragged melody that belongs to the frontier, half hymn, half saloon song. The room is filled with voices. Some men laugh too loudly, slapping each other on the back. Others sit quietly, staring into their drinks, gathering the courage to speak to one of the women. The women themselves move gracefully, their laughter deliberate, their smiles painted on with the same care as their rouge. Their dresses shimmer in the lamplight, silks, velvets, ribbons imported from faraway cities. Even if frayed at the edges in this dusty town, they are dazzling. For the cowboy who has just ridden 100 miles, or the miner who hasn't heard a woman's voice in months, this room feels like another world. He might spend his hard-earned wages not only for the company of a woman, but for the chance to sit in warmth, to hear music, to be called darlin' or sugar, as if he mattered to someone. Conversations drift through the air like smoke. One man brags about a gold strike. Another mutters about losing everything in a card game. A woman leans close, listening, her hand on his arm. Not just a performance, but also a survival skill. She learns what is happening in the town before the newspapers can print it, and as the night deepens, secrets spill more easily than whiskey. In the hallway upstairs, doors creak open and shut. The stairs groan under the weight of boots. But down here in the parlour, the illusion continues. Laughter, music, candlelight, and the soft hum of lives trying to escape loneliness, if only for a few hours. This was the heartbeat of a frontier night, not the gunfights sung about in dime novels, but the quieter exchanges that built the hidden economy of the West. A night inside a brothel was not just about desire, it was about comfort, companionship, and the fragile illusion that even on the far edge of civilization, one could still feel human. Not all brothels on the American frontier were created equal. Some were nothing more than wooden shacks at the edge of town, leaning sideways in the wind, their windows boarded with scraps of cloth instead of curtains. Others, however, rose like miniature palaces, painted in bright colours, trimmed with lace curtains, their doorways lit by lanterns that glowed like beacons in the night. In the poorer districts, men visited what were known as cribs. A crib was a single-room shack, barely wide enough to hold a bed and a chair. The walls were often thin boards, through which the sound of laughter, argument, or weeping could easily be heard. Inside, the furnishings were crude: a straw mattress, a chipped pitcher of water, perhaps a mirror cracked in one corner. The women who worked in these places had little comfort themselves, their rooms serving both as bedroom and stage. But in wealthier towns, especially those swollen with mining money or cattle profits, brothels could be grand. Picture a 2-story building at the centre of a bustling street, its windows hung with red velvet drapes, its porch lined with polished railings. Inside, the parlour might gleam with chandeliers imported from the east, their crystals scattering candlelight across patterned wallpaper. Carpets muffled footsteps, and the air smelled not of kerosene smoke but of rosewater, tobacco, and the faint musk of expensive brandy. A staircase curved upward from the main hall, polished smooth by countless boots. At the top, doors opened into private rooms, each decorated in its own theme, one with French lace, another with heavy velvet curtains, another with wallpapers patterned in exotic flowers. Beds were piled high with pillows, some rooms boasting gilded mirrors, others with brass bed frames that gleamed in the lamplight. Even the soundscape was part of the architecture. In the larger houses you might hear the steady thrum of a piano, the shuffle of cards, the muted thud of boots against the carpet, and above all the rise and fall of laughter, sometimes genuine, sometimes rehearsed, but always present. For the men who entered, these spaces were more than places of business. They were escapes. The architecture itself was part of the illusion. A miner, after months in a dark shaft, might feel transported by the glitter of chandeliers. A cowboy, after weeks on the trail under a canvas sky, might marvel at the softness of wallpaper and curtains. To them, the brothel was not just a building. It was a portal to another world. In this way, the architecture of desire shaped the very memory of the frontier. A man might forget the faces of the women he met, or the exact details of his conversations, but he would remember the warmth of the parlour, the glow of lamplight on red curtains, the way the outside world of dust and hardship seemed to vanish the moment he crossed the threshold. The brothel was theatre, stage, and home all at once, and for those who built them, every detail, from the squeak of the staircase to the shimmer of a chandelier, was part of the performance. If you listen closely, you can almost hear it. The faint sound of a piano drifting through the night air of a frontier town. The music doesn't come from the church or from a fine hotel. It comes from behind the velvet curtains of a brothel parlour. Music was the heartbeat of these houses. In the humblest crib, a woman might hum folk songs from her childhood while sitting on a straw mattress. In the grander establishments, a polished upright piano stood proudly in the corner of the parlour, its keys chipped from constant use. The women, or sometimes hired musicians, played waltzes, ballads, ragtime, or sentimental love songs. Imagine a room of tired cowboys and miners, eyes half closed, swaying gently as a woman's voice carried the tune of "Beautiful Dreamer" or "Home, Sweet Home." For a moment, the roughness of the frontier melted into tenderness, but the music was only one layer of the performance. Fashion added another. In an age when most frontier women wore plain calico dresses and heavy boots, the women of the brothel dazzled like exotic birds. They ordered gowns from New York or even Paris, delivered in steam trunks by train or stagecoach, silks in deep reds and blues, velvet trimmed with lace, skirts that shimmered under lamplight. A woman might step into a parlour in a gown 3 times more expensive than anything owned by the banker's wife down the street. There was theatre in every gesture, rouge-brightened pale cheeks, coal-lined tired eyes, and jewels, whether real or imitation, glittered at the throat and wrists. Feathered hats, satin gloves, and delicate slippers completed the illusion. Even if the gowns were worn thin at the seams, even if the jewellery was little more than glass, in the haze of lamplight and laughter, they sparkled like treasures. Conversation itself became part of the performance. The women learned how to flatter, how to coax, how to listen. A miner might speak clumsily of his work, and the woman beside him would nod, laugh softly, and ask just the right questions. A gambler might spin a tale of fortune, and she would pretend to believe him, eyes wide as if he were a king. In these moments, the brothel transformed into a stage where every person played a role, the men as heroes of their own sagas, the women as queens of elegance, the parlour as a theatre of dreams. For many men of the frontier, this was their first taste of refinement. Imagine a cowboy, dust still clinging to his boots, sitting mesmerised as a woman in satin played the piano and sang in French. He didn't understand the words, but the melody carried him far from the cattle trails and the endless wind. It was not only about desire, it was about escape, about glimpsing a world of culture and sophistication he might never otherwise know. And so, brothels became cultural islands in the sea of the frontier. They were places where music was played, where fashion shone, where lonely men found not just bodies to warm their nights, but illusions to soothe their souls. They were schools of elegance, theatres of survival, and stages upon which the rough, restless frontier could briefly pretend it was something softer, gentler, almost civilized. The American frontier was not only a land of cowboys and sheriffs, it was also a crossroads, where cultures from around the world collided in ways both harsh and tender. Brothels, strangely enough, became one of the places where that mixing of cultures was most visible. Imagine a single street in a mining town. On one end stands an Irish brothel, where women with red hair sing ballads of the old country, their laughter sprinkled with Gaelic words that only a few understand. A few doors down, a French madam presides over her parlour, filling it with perfume, lace, and chanson songs that make even the roughest miner sigh. In another corner of town, a Chinese brothel offers a world that feels entirely different. Rooms lit by paper lanterns, the air heavy with the scent of tea and opium, the women dressed in silken robes embroidered with dragons and flowers. For immigrants, the brothel could be both prison and lifeline. Many women arrived in America with nothing, promised jobs that never appeared, abandoned by husbands or families, caught in webs of debt or deception. For them, the brothel was survival, the only shelter available when the frontier offered no mercy. Others, however, found in it a strange kind of community. Women from the same homeland often stuck together, cooking familiar meals, singing familiar songs, and holding on to pieces of their old lives even as they adapted to the new. The mingling of cultures inside these houses reflected the mingling happening across the frontier itself. A German miner might sit drinking with an Irish cowboy, both entertained by a French woman who spoke to them in broken English. A Chinese gambler might play cards at the same table as a Swedish blacksmith, both of them listening to the strains of an American hymn sung softly in the background. In these lamplit parlours, languages mixed, stories overlapped, and the rough edges of cultural difference were for a moment smoothed over by whiskey, music, and the universal human hunger for comfort. But there was also tension. Immigrant women often carried the heaviest burdens, targeted by prejudice, and pushed into the harshest corners of the trade. Chinese women, in particular, were often brought against their will, treated as property more than people, their lives tightly controlled by traffickers and tong bosses. Newspapers of the time railed against the foreign houses of sin, stoking fears that outsiders threatened the moral fabric of the frontier. Yet those same towns depended on the money those houses brought in, and still, amidst the hardship, there were glimpses of resilience. An Irish girl who saved enough to open her own boarding house, a French madam who turned her brothel into one of the finest establishments west of the Mississippi. A Chinese courtesan who, against the odds, became known not only for her beauty, but for her sharp wit and her business sense, respected even by men who once looked down on her. The brothel, in this way, became a mirror of the immigrant experience itself, filled with exploitation, survival, prejudice, but also with moments of strength, adaptation, and unexpected power. If we are to truly understand the brothel on the frontier, we must step away from the glitter of the parlour and the mystery of the lantern-lit nights. We must look at the quiet hours, the ordinary rhythms of a woman's life behind those painted doors. A day might begin not with luxury, but with chores. The women rose late in the morning, after nights that stretched until dawn. They washed their faces in chipped porcelain basins, combed out hair heavy with pomade and dust, and changed into simple house dresses before the evening's finery was required. There were floors to be swept, sheets to be laundered, and lamps to be refilled with kerosene. In many houses, the women did much of this themselves, sharing duties like a family pressed into service together. Breakfast might be strong coffee and stale bread, or, in better houses, eggs, bacon, and fruit brought in from the market. The women gathered around the kitchen table, voices low, laughter soft, sharing gossip and stories. Here, without customers listening, they could speak more freely, complaining of difficult men, sharing hopes of escape, or laughing at the absurdities of the night before. Bonds were formed in those kitchens, bonds of sisterhood that often mattered more than the affection of passing strangers. The afternoon hours were quieter still. Some women napped, their bodies exhausted. Others mended dresses, repaired stockings, or polished jewellery that was more glass than gemstone. A few read novels, tattered romances passed from hand to hand, or wrote letters to family far away, letters that often left unsent, tucked into drawers as confessions never delivered. As evening approached, the transformation began. Corsets were tightened, hair curled and pinned, faces painted with rouge and powder. Dresses were chosen, bright silks, low-cut bodices, skirts that swirled when they moved through the parlour. By nightfall, the tired laundresses and seamstresses of the day had become glittering courtesans once more, ready to perform roles of laughter, desire, and elegance. But beneath the surface of routine, there were struggles. The risk of illness loomed constantly, from fevers to infections no doctor could cure. The threat of violence lingered in every drunken glance, every argument that began too loudly. The loneliness was sharp, too. For all the noise of the parlour, many women felt the ache of isolation, the absence of family, the quiet longing for stability they might never have. And yet, within the hardships, there were moments of joy. A shared meal in the kitchen, a night when the piano played just the right song, a customer who treated them with unexpected kindness, a letter finally sent and answered. These small things stitched together the fabric of their lives. Daily life in the brothel was not all glamour or all despair. It was a fragile balance, a routine of survival where work and performance blurred, where friendship softened the edges of hardship, and where each woman carried her own dreams, however faint, into another day. For much of their existence, brothels lived in the shadows of frontier life, accepted, tolerated, but rarely spoken of aloud. Yet every so often, they erupted into the harsh light of public scandal. Newspapers, hungry for drama, seized upon stories of murder, theft, or betrayal that unfolded within their walls. A jealous lover shooting a rival in the parlour, a wealthy politician discovered in the company of a well-known madam, a respected businessman ruined after gambling away his fortune in a brothel's back room. Trials followed, and with them crowds of curious townsfolk filled the courthouse. Testimonies were whispered about in saloons and barber shops, the names of women repeated in scandalous tones. Yet, for all the public outrage, there was often a peculiar double standard. Men caught in these affairs were scolded but forgiven. The women, however, bore the brunt of moral condemnation, their names forever marked by the ink of gossip. And yet, these scandals revealed truths everyone already knew. That brothels were woven into the life of the town, that the lines between respectability and vice were thinner than people admitted, and that power and pleasure often walked hand in hand, Some madams brought to trial defended themselves with wit and pride. They reminded juries of the taxes they paid, the charities they supported, the jobs they created, and in many cases juries hesitated. Too many citizens relied in one way or another on the money brothels generated. Convictions were rare, punishments light. Scandal sold papers, but it rarely changed the fabric of the town. The stories lingered, though. Murders in parlours, duels fought over courtesans, fortunes lost in velvet-draped rooms. These tales entered the folklore of the frontier, half true, half legend, always retold with a little more colour than before. And in their retelling, brothels moved from hidden reality into myth. And so, we reach the end of our journey through the brothels of the American frontier. What began as crude shacks at the edges of mining camps grew into institutions that shaped towns, economies, and even culture. They were places of hardship and survival, of laughter rehearsed and songs played late into the night. They were homes to women who carried both sorrow and strength, women who were condemned by society but often more essential to its survival than anyone cared to admit. Brothels reveal the contradictions of the West. They were both reviled and relied upon, hidden yet central, condemned as immoral yet tolerated as necessary. In their parlours, men sought comfort, women carved out fragile independence, and communities quietly financed their schools, streets and hospitals with the very money they pretended not to see. And though reformers eventually drove them out, their presence lingers in memory, in old buildings on forgotten streets, in whispered stories passed down, and in the myths that still shape how we imagine the Wild West. So, as you lie back now, drifting into sleep, picture a frontier town at night, the wind rattling through empty streets, the glow of a lantern behind velvet curtains, a piano playing softly in the distance, its notes carrying into the darkness. History is rarely simple. It is full of shadows and contradictions, of people surviving in ways we may not expect. And in the story of the American frontier, brothels were not just footnotes, they were part of the heartbeat. Good night, dear historian. May your dreams carry you gently through the lamplight and laughter of another world, long vanished, but never truly forgotten. Hello, guys. I want to start by asking you a question. Where are you all watching from tonight, or morning, or afternoon? Drop your location and time in the comments. The time zone thing always fascinates me. We had comments from Seattle to Stockholm last time. Also, if you're a regular here, a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button and give this video a like if you enjoy it. It helps the channel a ton. Now, get comfortable. I mean it. Fix your pillows, grab that blanket. This one's worth settling in for. We're going back to Victorian London, 1865. In Victorian London, a city of contrast and shadows, women who sold their bodies weren't just risking their reputations. They risked being strapped down and forcibly examined with steel instruments by male doctors. That was the legal part. Quick subscribe reminder if you're a regular. Also, where's everyone at tonight, or morning, or afternoon? Drop your location and time in the comments. The time zone thing never stops being weird to me, so we're going back to Victorian London tonight. But hold on, get yourself comfortable first, I mean it. Fix your pillows, grab that blanket, this one's worth settling in for. Morning in London, 1865. You're waking up to the taste of cold dust and fog so thick you could scoop it with a spoon. Your eyes adjust to the grey half-light, filtering through a cracked window, and immediately you know something's wrong. This isn't your comfortable bed. The straw mattress beneath you crackles with every shift of your weight, probably full of more fleas than actual straw. Something worse. Welcome to the life of a Victorian prostitute. Not exactly the glamorous historical setting your high school teacher covered, huh? The woman sharing your mattress stirs beside you, her body radiating heat in the cold, damp room. Meet Mary. She's 19, though her eyes look 40. Arrived in London 6 months ago from some tiny village in Yorkshire with dreams of becoming a lady's maid. Yeah, that didn't work out. Mary stretches and winces. Her body aches in places she didn't know could ache before coming to London. Last night was busy. Not her record, but close enough. In the better brothels uptown, the high-class girls might see 3 or 4 gentlemen a night. Down here in the East End, you take what you can get. Up, you lazy halls! The door bangs open and the room's dim light is cut off by Mrs. Harper's massive silhouette. Inspection in 5 minutes. Anyone with the clap gets no breakfast? Ah, Mrs. Harper. 5 feet of pure terror wrapped in a gaudy dressing gown. The madame of this particular establishment isn't known for her morning cheer. Or any cheer, really. "You hear about Jenny?" whispers the woman on Mary's other side as they struggle to their feet. Poor thing, couldn't walk after that sailor last night. Harper made her see 5 more after him anyway. Mary's stomach churns. She'd seen Jenny this morning, curled up in the corner room where they put the sick girls. The doctor wouldn't be called. Doctors cost money, and girls like Jenny were cheaper to replace than repair. I spent way too long researching Victorian brothels for this story. Like, I had to clear my browser history afterward, and now I'm definitely on some watch list. But here's what I found that surprised me. These brothels weren't hidden away. They operated pretty much in plain sight, especially in certain neighbourhoods. And get this, there were actually more brothels than schools in London during this period. Not exactly the prudish Victorians from your history books, right? Mary shuffles with the other girls, 12 in total, into the inspection room. It's really just a kitchen table where Mrs. Harper checks them for obvious signs of disease each morning. The smell of burned porridge hangs in the air, the promise of the only meal many of the girls will get until evening. "Arms up! Legs apart!" Mrs. Harper barks, moving down the line. You're thinking, this is how I die, with 12 half-naked women in a freezing room that smells like someone died in it, which, if we're being honest, someone probably did last winter. Let me paint you a picture of what Mary sees as she stands there shivering. The inspection room windows face east, and weak morning sunlight filters through a yellow haze of fog and cold smoke. London's famous pea soupers, they called these fogs. So thick you could barely see your hand in front of your face. So toxic, they killed thousands every year. The walls are stained yellow from decades of coal fires and tobacco. The floorboards are uneven and rotting in places, and there's a suspicious dark patch in the corner that nobody talks about. You, Mrs. Harper jabs a finger at a red-headed girl who can't be more than 15. You're bleeding. Get yourself cleaned up before the morning customers. But Mrs. Harper, it's not. I'm just having my monthly. The slap echoes through the room. Did I ask for excuses? Men don't pay to hear your problems. They pay for a clean hole, so make sure yours is ready. Like I said, Mrs. Harper isn't exactly running for Mother of the Year. I found this journal entry from an actual brothel worker from the 1860s. She wrote, "Some nights I see so many men I lose count. My body feels hollow, like they've scraped out everything inside me that made me human." Kind of puts our bad days at the office in perspective, doesn't it? In case you're wondering how Mary ended up here, her story wasn't unusual. London in the 1860s was booming. The Industrial Revolution was in full swing. People poured in from the countryside looking for work. For men, there were factories, shipyards, construction. For women, the options were limited. You could be a factory worker, making about 7 shillings a week, which is roughly $30 in today's money, for 6 days of 14-hour shifts. Or a seamstress, hunched over by candlelight until you went blind, earning maybe 5 shillings on a good week. A shop girl? 9 shillings if you were lucky, but you needed good moral character for that job, which meant if the boss found out you weren't a virgin, you were done. Or you could work in a brothel and make 7 shillings in a single night. Mary hadn't planned on this life. She'd arrived at the docks 6 months earlier with £3 saved up, her life savings, and a letter of recommendation for a position as a housemaid. That turned out to be for a house that didn't exist. "Fresh off the boat, aren't you, love?" a man had said, appearing beside her as she stood crying on the dock. "I know someone who could help a pretty girl like you." 3 hours later, she'd met Mrs. Harper. 3 hours and 10 minutes later, she'd met her first customer. After inspection, Mary pulls on her work clothes, a cheap imitation of what the fashionable ladies are wearing uptown, but cut lower in the bust and higher at the ankle. The fabric is rough against her skin, probably some kind of wool blend that's been worn by a dozen girls before her. Everything in this place gets recycled, even the girls themselves. "You're with Mr. Wallace first," Mrs. Harper tells her, checking a grimy notebook. "He likes the northerners, thinks you're more, what's his word, authentic." She snorts. After him, you've got 3 regulars and whatever walk-ins come by. Thursday's usually busy, men getting their fun in before the weekend with the wife. Mary nods. Mr. Wallace isn't the worst. He's quick at least, and sometimes brings her a ribbon or a sweet. The thought of the hard candy makes her stomach growl. The porridge from breakfast sits like a lump in her gut, filling but barely edible. It's meant to be cheap and starchy to keep the girls going through long nights with minimal expense. "Hey," a voice whispers behind her. "It's Betsy, the closest thing Mary has to a friend here. I saved you this from yesterday." She slips Mary a slightly wrinkled apple, its skin dull but the fruit still firm. Mary's eyes widen. Fresh fruit is a luxury here. "Where'd you get this?" "That solicitor, the one with the birthmark. His wife packed him lunch and he gave it to me, said I was too skinny." They share a dark laugh. Men like the solicitor come here and pay to use their bodies, then get concerned about their diets. The absurdity isn't lost on them. The house begins to stir as the first customers arrive. It's mostly working men at this hour. Labourers stopping by before their shift. Shopkeepers slipping away while their apprentices mind the store. Clerks who told their wives they had an early meeting. Mary takes a bite of the apple, savouring the burst of sweetness. Little pleasures. That's what keeps you going in a place like this. "Wait, you think I'm making this up? The apple thing?" "Nope. I actually found this detail in a diary from a reformer who interviewed women in these brothels in the 1850s. Fresh fruit was so rare that one woman saved an orange for 3 days, just taking tiny nibbles to make it last. Imagine being so deprived that an orange becomes your most prized possession. Through the thin walls, Mary can hear the morning business picking up. The fake moans, the creaking bed frames, the occasional laugh or cry. Each room in this narrow townhouse holds different stories, different horrors. In the room to the left, there's Ellen, who came from Ireland during the famine and has been here 8 years, ancient in prostitute years. To the right is Sarah, who was sold to the brothel by her own father when she was 13. Across the hall is the specialty room, where Lucy caters to men with particular interests. The walls of that room are thicker, but sometimes the sounds still escape. Mary finishes the apple, core and all, and checks herself in the cracked mirror on the wall. Her face is pale with dark circles under her eyes, but Mrs. Harper has taught them all how to hide these imperfections. There's a pot of rouge on the table, shared by all the girls. It contains lead and mercury. They know it's slowly poisoning them, but pale lips don't attract customers. "Mary!" Mrs. Harper's voice bellows from downstairs. "Your first is here!" With a deep breath, Mary arranges her face into what passes for a smile and heads down the narrow staircase. The steps creak ominously, and there's no banister to hold on to. One girl broke her ankle on these stairs last winter, and Mrs. Harper had her working on her back the same day. Mr. Wallace waits in the small front parlour, his hat in his hands. He's in his 50s, balding, with the soft hands of a man who's never done manual labour. A clerk of some kind, Mary guesses, though they've never discussed his profession. "Ah, Mary," he says, his Yorkshire accent thickening as it always does when he sees her. It's why he requests her, the reminder of home. Lovely as ever. She curtsies slightly, playing the game. "Good morning, sir. Shall we go up?" In your cosy modern bed with your clean sheets and your privacy, it's almost impossible to imagine what came next. The mechanical nature of it, the disconnection Mary feels from her own body, like she's floating somewhere near the ceiling, watching someone else go through the motions. Mr. Wallace is indeed quick today. 15 minutes later, he's straightening his collar and pressing 2 shillings into her palm, the usual fee plus a small tip. "You're a good girl, Mary," he says, patting her cheek. A good girl. If her mother could see her now. Once he's gone, Mary has 17 minutes before her next appointment. Just enough time to use the shared basin to wash, to fix her hair, to pretend she's someone else for a moment. This was the reality for tens of thousands of women in Victorian London, not the glamorous courtesans you might see in movies draped in silk and entertaining dukes. Those existed too, the high-class prostitutes who might see one wealthy client a night in luxurious surroundings. But for every one of those, there were hundreds of Marys working in cramped, disease-ridden brothels or walking the streets. Funny thing about Victorian London, it was so crowded, so chaotic, that whole neighbourhoods could exist in plain sight, while remaining invisible to respectable society. The East End, where Mary's brothel stands, might as well be on another planet from the fashionable West End, though they are only a few miles apart. In the afternoon, after 6 more men, a quick mental calculation tells you that's 7 so far today, and the evening rush hasn't even started, Mary gets a rare hour of freedom. Mrs. Harper allows the girls short excursions, partly as a reward, partly because men sometimes like to pick up women on the street rather than visit a brothel directly. Mary wraps herself in her shawl, the early spring air still carrying winter's bite. The streets of Whitechapel teem with life, vendors hawking everything from hot eels to second-hand boots, children darting between legs on mysterious errands, men and women of every description going about their business. "Oi, Mary," calls a familiar voice. It's Tom, a street vendor who sells roasted chestnuts in winter and fruits in summer. "Lookin' peaky today, love. Have one on me." He tosses her a small wrinkled apple, similar to the one Betsy gave her. Mary catches it with a genuine smile. "Thanks, Tom. How's business?" He shrugs expressively. "Can't complain." "Well, I could, but who'd listen?" These small interactions, Tom, the baker who sometimes slips her a stale roll, the seamstress who fixes her dresses for free, they're what keep Mary tethered to humanity, remind her that not everyone sees her as just a body to be used. She wanders toward the Thames, the great river that bisects London like a dirty brown snake. The smell hits her before she sees it, a putrid mixture of sewage, industrial waste, and things better not contemplated. Still, it's oddly peaceful here, watching the boats navigate the churning waters. A young woman stands at the edge of a pier, looking down into the murky depths. Something in her stance makes Mary pause. The woman sways slightly, leaning forward. "Miss," Mary calls, moving closer. "Are you all right?" The woman turns, and Mary sees she's hardly more than a girl, perhaps 17. Her eyes are red-rimmed, her clothes decent but worn. "What's it to you?" she asks, but there's no venom in it, just exhaustion. "Nothing," Mary admits. "Just... it's not worth it, whatever it is." The girl laughs, a hollow sound. "Easy for you to say. You've got work." Her gaze flicks over Mary's attire, the slightly too bright colours that mark her profession. "This kind of work you don't want," Mary says quietly. For a moment they stand in silence, 2 women on the edge, one of the river, both of society. "I lost my position," the girl finally says. "Housekeeper found a letter from my sweetheart. Said I was morally unfit to serve in a respectable household." She kicks a pebble into the water. 3 years I worked there, never a complaint, but 1 letter. She trails off. Mary wants to walk away, she really does. Mrs. Harper would skin her alive if she brought home another stray. But she remembers her first day in London, how close she came to this same pier, this same decision. "There's a charity place," she says hesitantly. "Urania Cottage, in Shepherd's Bush, for women who need a fresh start. That writer fellow runs it." "Dickens." The girl looks at her suspiciously. "Why would they take me?" "Because that's what they do. Look, I'm not saying it's paradise, but it's not this." Mary gestures to the river. "And it's not what I do either. You know what's wild? Charles Dickens really did run a home for fallen women called Urania Cottage. He worked with a philanthropist named Angela Burdett Coates, and they tried to rehabilitate prostitutes and teach them skills so they could find other work. I read Dickens's actual letters about it. He interviewed every woman personally and used their stories in his novels. The dude was problematic in many ways, but he did try to help. The girl seems to consider this. Finally, she steps back from the edge. "Shepherd's Bush, you said?" Mary nods. "Ask for Miss Molly. Tell her..." She hesitates. "Tell her Mary from Mrs. Harper's sent you." It's a small thing, this intervention. One girl saved from the river today doesn't change the system that will push another to the same spot tomorrow. But in a life where Mary has so little control, these tiny choices matter. As she watches the girl walk away, Mary realizes she's going to be late. Mrs. Harper doesn't tolerate lateness. The punishment will be extra clients tonight, which means less sleep, which means looking worse tomorrow, which means attracting lower-paying customers. customers, which means it's a vicious cycle that's nearly impossible to break. She hurries back through the crowded streets, dodging carriages and costers' carts. London in 1865 is a city of extremes, extreme wealth and extreme poverty, often on the same street. As Mary passes from Cheapside to Spitalfields, the buildings grow shabbier, the smells more pungent, the faces harder. A police officer watches her from a corner, his expression a mixture of contempt and interest. The police generally leave brothels alone. Many officers are regular customers after all, but they enjoy reminding women of the town of their precarious status. "Afternoon, officer," Mary says, keeping her eyes down as she passes. "Bit early to be working, isn't it?" he calls after her. She doesn't respond. Engaging would only encourage him, and she can't afford trouble, not with the new laws being discussed in Parliament. She's heard whispers about something called the Contagious Diseases Act, which would give police the power to arrest any woman they suspect of prostitution and force her to undergo a medical examination. The thought makes her shudder. Unlike your snug bed at home, Mary has no true safe space. Even her room at the brothel offers only the illusion of privacy. Mrs. Harper has been known to bring customers in while girls are sleeping, if business is particularly good. The streets are dangerous, the police are threats, not protectors. There is nowhere in London where Mary can truly rest. As she approaches Mrs. Harper's establishment, a narrow three-story building wedged between a gin shop and a pawnbroker, Mary takes a deep breath. She squares her shoulders and arranges her features into the blank mask she wears for work. She's already calculating how many more men she'll need to see today to make her quota and avoid Mrs. Harper's wrath. Inside, the house is busy. A group of sailors on shore leave has arrived, and the parlour is full of loud voices and laughter. Mrs. Harper spots Mary immediately. "Where the bloody hell have you been?" she hisses, grabbing Mary's arm with fingers like talons. "I've got men waiting and not enough girls." "Sorry, Mrs. Harper, I lost track of time." "Lost track of?" The older woman's face purples. "You'll lose more than that if you pull this again. Now get upstairs and sort yourself out. Room 3. You've got back-to-backs until midnight." Back-to-backs. No breaks between customers. Just an endless parade of men until midnight, or, more likely, until the early hours of the morning. As Mary climbs the stairs, her body already aching from the morning's work, she thinks about the girl at the river. She hopes she makes it to Urania Cottage. She hopes Miss Molly remembers her. She hopes something in this god-forsaken city is actually what it claims to be. In the distance, church bells ring out, marking the hour. 5 o'clock, 7 hours to midnight. If each customer takes 20 minutes with 5 minutes in between. Mary stops calculating. Some things are better not known. She enters room 3 with its sagging bed and stained wallpaper, and begins to prepare for the night ahead. As she does, she wonders, not for the first time, how many women in London are doing exactly the same thing at this exact moment. Thousands, certainly. Tens of thousands, possibly. Each with their own story. Each with their own path that led them here. Each hoping for something better tomorrow, though experience has taught them better than to expect it. It's strange to think that while her own comfortable middle-class ancestors were living their proper Victorian lives, going to church, observing strict social codes, pretending sex didn't exist, this parallel world was thriving just around the corner. History books tend to focus on the royals, the politicians, the generals, but for every Queen Victoria, there were thousands of Marys. Tomorrow Mary will wake up again on that straw mattress. She'll endure another inspection, another day of men, another struggle to maintain some shred of herself amid it all. She'll look for small kindnesses, an apple, a friendly word, a moment of genuine connection, and maybe, if she's very lucky, she'll find a way out. But tonight, as you lie in your comfortable bed with your soft pillows and clean sheets, warm and safe and free to make your own choices, spare a thought for Mary and all the women like her. Their stories deserve to be told too. Unlike your cosy bed and peaceful night ahead, Mary's evening is just beginning. A heavy tread on the stairs tells her the first sailor has arrived. Many people romanticize Victorian courtship, picturing stolen glances across ballrooms, passionate love letters, and gentlemen proposing on bended knee. But for most, it was a terrifying gauntlet of bizarre rules, awkward encounters, and social landmines that could ruin your entire future. Dating wasn't about finding your soulmate. It was about not accidentally getting engaged to a stranger because you mishandled a handkerchief. So yeah, if these stories sound interesting to you, subscribe. And I'm curious, what time is it where you are? Last week, someone from Canada mentioned they listened during lunch breaks. Not judging, just wasn't expecting that. We're heading back to Victorian England in a minute. First, though, get comfortable. Seriously, take a second. Adjust whatever needs adjusting. You won't want to move once we get started. Your eyes flutter open in London, 1875. The first thing that hits you is the weight. Something heavy is pressing down on your ribs, squeezing your waist like you're being slowly crushed by a python. You take a shallow breath, that's all you can manage, and realise you've woken up in a corset. And not just any corset, but one cinched so tight you can feel your organs rearranging themselves to make room. Miss Elena, please hold still. We must have you looking perfect today. That's your lady's maid Agnes, currently attempting to compress your waist to the fashionable 18 inches. You're 21 years old, it's your third season in London, and if you don't secure a husband soon, you'll be well on your way to spinsterhood. Unlike your comfy bed back in 2025, you're perched on the edge of a wooden chair in your dressing room, gripping the sides as Agnes performs what can only be described as socially acceptable torture in the name of beauty. Your mother insists you look your absolute best today, Agnes continues, giving the laces another brutal tug. Lady Harrington's tea is very important. I hear Mr. Blackwood will be in attendance. You stifle a groan. Mr. Blackwood, the latest in your mother's parade of suitable matches. He's wealthy, from a good family, and about as interesting as watching paint dry. But he's eligible, and in Victorian England, that trumps personality every single time. I spent a concerning amount of time researching Victorian matchmaking for this story, and let me tell you, dating apps might be a hellscape, but they're nothing compared to the Victorian marriage market. Courtship in the 1800s was basically a real-life game of chess where one wrong move could ruin your entire life. Agnes, you whisper, must the corset be so tight? I could hardly breathe at Lady Pembroke's ball last week. Your mother says a gentleman doesn't want a wife who eats more than a bird, Agnes replies, not easing up one bit. Now, let's get you into your dress. The dress. A pale blue morning gown with enough layers to clothe a small village. The wire cage crinoline underneath keeps the skirt extended in a perfect bell shape. It looks elegant, but feels like you're wearing a prison. You can't sit properly, can't move quickly, and can't even use the bathroom without a major operation. Not that a proper Victorian lady would ever admit to having bodily functions. The marriage market. Your one and only career. For women, marriage was essentially their career. A bad match could mean a lifetime of misery with no escape. Divorce was nearly impossible, incredibly scandalous, and usually left women destitute. The stakes were impossibly high. Your mother has been up since dawn, Agnes says, arranging your hair. She's determined to see you engaged before the season ends. You know what she isn't saying. Your younger sister is waiting her turn to be introduced to society, and having two unmarried daughters doing the rounds at the same time would be both expensive and slightly embarrassing. You're taking up space in the marriage market. Time to move inventory. Picture this. The Victorian marriage market was literally called the season. It ran from April to August when Parliament was in session. Aristocratic and upper-middle-class families would pack up from their country estates and head to London for months of strategically planned social events. The entire purpose? To throw young women and men together in carefully supervised settings so they could find suitable matches. Miss Elena, your mother wants to review your dance card before we leave, Agnes says, pinning the final strands of your hair into place. The dance card was a little booklet attached to your wrist by a ribbon where gentlemen would pencil in which dances they'd reserved with you. A full dance card meant you were popular. An empty one meant you were failing miserably, dating by way of public performance and immediate visible judgment. Fun dot. Agnes, what if I don't want to marry Mr. Blackwood or any of Mother's choices? Agnes looks at you like you've suggested flying to the moon. Miss Elena, she says quietly, what choice do you have? And that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because in Victorian England, particularly for women, choice wasn't really part of the equation. The goal was marriage, preferably advantageous marriage, and the entire society was structured around making that happen. A debut, a dress, and a dossier. The coming out process had nothing to do with sexuality and everything to do with announcing, "Hello world, I'm officially on the marriage market." For upper-class girls, this meant being presented at court, literally curtsying before the Queen to signal your debut into society. It was essentially a royal stamp of approval saying, "This one's ready for breeding." Your coming out had been 3 years ago. You remember standing in a line of nervous girls in white dresses with feathers in their hair, waiting to curtsy before Queen Victoria herself. One girl actually fainted. Nobody helped her until after her presentation was complete. Priorities. "You look beautiful, Miss Elena," Agnes says, stepping back to admire her work. You stare at yourself in the mirror. You do look beautiful, in the Victorian sense. Pale skin, achieved by staying indoors, a tightly corseted waist, and elaborately styled hair. You're a perfect product, packaged and ready for market. When you head downstairs, your mother is waiting in the drawing room, already dressed in her visiting clothes. She looks you up and down with the critical eye of a livestock judge at a county fair. "Elena, dear, turn around." You do a slow spin, and she nods approvingly. The blue brings out your eyes. Mr. Blackwood mentioned he favours blue. Of course he did, and of course she remembered. Your mother has been collecting information on eligible bachelors like she's building a dossier for the Secret Service. "Mother," you begin carefully, "I was thinking perhaps I might spend some time in the library today instead." "Don't be ridiculous," she cuts you off. "Lady Harrington has specifically arranged for several eligible gentlemen to be present. It would be most impolite to decline." Translation: get in the carriage, we're going husband hunting. The carriage ride to Lady Harrington's is uncomfortable, both because of your corset and the lecture your mother delivers on property etiquette. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't laugh too loudly. Don't eat too much. Don't sit too close to a gentleman, but also don't be standoffish. It's like trying to navigate a labyrinth blindfolded. "And remember," your mother says, as the carriage pulls up to the impressive townhouse, "Mr. Blackwood is heir to a considerable fortune. His family owns property in both Kent and Yorkshire." You nod dutifully. Property in Kent and Yorkshire. How thrilling. How romantic. The art of controlled conversation. The footman helps you down from the carriage, and you follow your mother up the steps to Lady Harrington's home. Inside, the drawing room is already filled with people, mostly women in elegant dresses with a strategic sprinkling of eligible bachelors. The men look as uncomfortable as the women look determined. It's a battlefield disguised as a tea party. "Mrs. Pembroke, Miss Pembroke, how delightful!" Lady Harrington swoops down upon you, air-kissing your mother and examining you with sharp eyes. "Elena, my dear, you look positively blooming. Come, there are several people you simply must meet." And so it begins. You're paraded around the room like a prize heifer, introduced to a series of gentlemen who all blur together in a sea of side whiskers and polite bows. You make the same small talk about the weather, the season, the latest performance at the theatre. You are careful to seem intelligent enough to not be dull, but not so intelligent as to be threatening. Let me tell you about the Victorian rules for conversation between unmarried men and women, because they're gloriously, hilariously specific. A proper young lady couldn't just start chatting with a man she didn't know. She had to be formally introduced by a mutual acquaintance. Even after an introduction, physical contact was strictly limited. No touching, and definitely no hugging. A gloved hand might be offered for the briefest of handshakes or to be escorted into dinner. "Miss Pembroke." A deep voice breaks into your thoughts, and you turn to see a tall man with dark hair and impressively bushy sideburns bowing slightly. "I believe we met at Lady Westmorland's ball last month. Henry Blackwood at your service." So this is the famous Mr. Blackwood. You curtsy in response, noting that he is at least better looking than your mother had led you to believe. Not that it matters. His personality could still be as dry as last week's toast. "Mr. Blackwood," you respond. "How lovely to see you again." "I trust you are enjoying the season thus far?" he asks, and you launch into the expected script of polite conversation. The thing about Victorian dating is that it was almost impossible to get to know someone properly before marriage. All your interactions were supervised, and all your conversations were limited to approved topics. You were basically expected to decide if you wanted to spend your entire life with someone based on how well they made small talk about the weather and whether they could dance a proper quadrille. "Would you care to take a turn about the room, Miss Pembroke?" Mr. Blackwood asks, offering his arm in a perfectly proper manner. You nod and place your hand lightly on his arm, careful to maintain the appropriate distance between your bodies, close enough to converse, far enough to prevent any improper contact. Your mother, you notice, is watching like a hawk from across the room, a satisfied smile on her face. "I understand you enjoy reading, Miss Pembroke," Mr. Blackwood says, as you stroll slowly around the perimeter of the room. "May I ask what authors you prefer?" You hesitate. This is a trap. If you name something too intellectual, you risk seeming blue-stockingish, a term for overly educated women who are considered unmarriageable. If you name something too frivolous, you risk seeming empty-headed. Better to aim for the middle ground. "I enjoy Jane Austen," you reply, which is both true and safe, and some poetry. "Excellent taste," he nods approvingly. "I myself enjoy Sir Walter Scott and Wordsworth." And thus begins the delicate dance of trying to gauge compatibility through the most constrained conversation imaginable. It's like trying to assess someone's entire personality by watching them select produce at a grocery store. Good luck with that. The stakes are high, the choices are few. "May I be so bold as to request the honour of calling on you tomorrow afternoon, Miss Pembroke?" Mr. Blackwood asks as your circuit of the room nears completion. This is significant. A gentleman requesting to call means he wants to visit you at home, still chaperoned, of course, which indicates serious interest. Your mother will be ecstatic. "I would be delighted," you respond, because what else can you say? The rest of the tea passes in a blur of cucumber sandwiches, lukewarm tea, and stilted conversation. By the time you and your mother return home, your face hurts from maintaining a pleasant expression, and your ribs are screaming for release from the corset. "Mr. Blackwood was quite attentive," your mother says, practically glowing with satisfaction, "and he's requested to call tomorrow. I knew the blue dress was the right choice." "Yes, mother. It was definitely the blue dress that sealed the deal, not the substantial dowry you'll bring to the marriage, or the advantageous connection between our families." "He seems nice," you offer, which is about as enthusiastic as you can manage. "Nice, my dear? He's perfect. Excellent family, substantial means, and still under 30. You couldn't ask for a better match." You couldn't ask for much of anything in Victorian dating, that was kind of the point. Silent signals and secret languages. Here's the wild thing about Victorian courtship. The rules were so rigid, so formalised, that people had to develop elaborate workarounds just to communicate basic human feelings. Because you couldn't just say, "Hey, I like you," or "Actually, I think you're as boring as wallpaper paste." Instead, you had entire silent languages, the way you held your fan, how you wore your gloves, where you placed your calling card, all to try to convey messages you weren't allowed to speak aloud. "Agnes, please help me out of this dress," you say, once you're back in your room. "I can hardly breathe." As Agnes unlaces your corset, you take your first deep breath in hours. The relief is immediate and intense, like finally getting into your comfy clothes after a day in uncomfortable business wear, but 1,000 times more extreme. "Mr. Blackwood seemed quite taken with you," Agnes comments as she hangs up your dress. "Your mother believes he might propose before the season's end." The thought sends a chill through you. Marriage to Mr. Blackwood, a man you've spoken to for perhaps a total of 30 minutes, always under supervision. A man whose true character, interests, temperament, and habits you know absolutely nothing about. Yet, you're expected to entrust your entire future to him. That night, as you lie in your bed, a four-poster with heavy curtains that can be drawn for warmth and privacy, you stare up at the canopy and consider your options. They are, unfortunately, limited. You could refuse Mr. Blackwood if he proposes, but that would mean continuing on the marriage market, enduring more seasons, more teas, and more awkward conversations with strange men. Your parents would be disappointed, possibly angry. Society would begin to wonder what was wrong with you. or you could accept securing your future but tying yourself forever to a man you barely know. There was a darkness to Victorian dating that the romantic novels don't show you. People made desperate choices because the alternatives were worse. Women, especially, had few options outside of marriage, no real career prospects, limited education, and often no independent income. Is it any wonder that Victorian literature is filled with disastrous marriages? They were basically playing relationship roulette with the highest possible stakes. A walk in the park, a test of wills. The next day, Mr. Blackwood calls at exactly the appropriate hour, not too early to seem eager, not too late to seem disrespectful. He's shown into the drawing room where you wait with your mother, who has strategically arranged herself at the far end of the room, close enough to chaperone, far enough to give the illusion of privacy. "Miss Pembroke," he bows, "you look lovely today." "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood," you curtsy in return. "Won't you sit down?" He takes a seat across from you, maintaining a proper distance. Your mother pretends to be engrossed in her embroidery, but is clearly listening to every word. "I trust you're well?" he asks. "Very well, thank you," you reply. "And yourself?" "Quite well." An awkward silence falls. This is the problem with Victorian dating small talk. There are only so many polite nothings you can exchange before you run out of approved topics. "I was wondering," Mr. Blackwood says finally, "if you and your mother might do me the honour of accompanying me to the botanical gardens tomorrow. The weather promises to be fair. A public outing, another step in the courtship progression." Your mother looks up from her embroidery, beaming. "We would be delighted," she answers before you can speak. "Wouldn't we, Elena?" "Yes," you say, because again, what choice do you have? That sounds lovely. Mr. Blackwood stays for exactly the appropriate amount of time, not so short as to be rude, not so long as to be presumptuous, before taking his leave with another bow and a promise to call for you at 2 o'clock tomorrow. As soon as he's gone, your mother is by your side, practically vibrating with excitement. "A walk in the gardens, my dear. He's clearly smitten. I wouldn't be surprised if he speaks to your father within the month." "Mother, I've barely spoken to him," you protest. "I hardly know him at all." She pats your hand condescendingly. "Nonsense. Your father and I were engaged after 3 meetings. That's how it's done in proper society. You'll have a lifetime to get acquainted after you're married." The Victorian approach to marriage compatibility was wildly different from ours today. We worry about emotional connection, shared values, and whether someone's Netflix preferences are compatible with ours. Back then, it was all about social standing, financial security, and family connections. Actual personal compatibility was considered a nice bonus if it happened, but certainly not a requirement. That night, as Agnes helps you prepare for bed, she notices your distracted expression. "Troubled thoughts, Miss Elena?" she asks, brushing out your hair. "Agnes, do you think it's possible to marry for love in our world, or is it always just a business arrangement?" Agnes's hands pause briefly before resuming their work. "I think," she says carefully, "that love can grow where it's planted, but the soil must be right first." Translation: Sure, you might eventually fall in love with Mr. Blackwood, but first make sure he's not going to leave you penniless or treat you badly. You climb into bed, your mind still spinning with thoughts of tomorrow's outing and what it might mean for your future. The mattress is stuffed with horsehair, the luxury option in Victorian times, and your sheets are fine linen. But despite these comforts, sleep feels distant. In the quiet darkness of your bedroom, you wonder what Mr. Blackwood is thinking. Is he lying awake too, contemplating a future with you? Or is he simply checking off boxes on his list of requirements for a suitable wife? Does he care about your thoughts, your dreams, your desires? Or just your dowry and family connections? You'll likely never know. That's the tragedy of Victorian dating. 2 people making life-altering decisions based on the barest acquaintance, both wearing masks of propriety that hide their true selves. It's a system designed to create matches, not happiness. As you finally drift towards sleep, your last thought is of tomorrow's garden walk and what new steps in this elaborate courtship dance it might bring. The rules are clear, the expectations set. All that remains is to play your part in this carefully choreographed performance and hope that when the music stops, you find yourself in a partnership you can endure, if not enjoy. The language of fans, flowers, and handkerchiefs. Your body sinks deeper into your modern mattress as you think about how different dating is today compared to Victorian times. How lucky we are to be able to actually get to know someone before committing our lives to them. How fortunate to have choices, independence, and the freedom to express our feelings directly instead of through elaborate codes and signals. The morning of your garden outing dawns bright and clear. Your stomach is in knots, not from excitement, but from the sheer weight of expectations. Yesterday, your mother spent 3 hours coaching you on proper garden walking etiquette, as if strolling through flowers requires specialized training. Agnes, you whisper, as she tightens your corset for the day. What if I trip and fall into a rose bush? Mother would never recover from the shame. Agnes snorts, then quickly composes herself. Miss Elena, just remember to keep a proper distance from Mr. Blackwood, and for heaven's sake don't touch anything without your gloves. Ah, yes, the gloves. In Victorian England, bare hands were practically considered obscene. A proper lady never ever went outdoors with naked hands. The physical barrier of fabric between your skin and the world was just one more way to maintain that precious proper distance between yourself and potential suitors. As Agnes helps you into your walking dress, a slightly less formal outfit that still requires a corset, petticoats, and enough fabric to upholster a sofa, you notice her slipping something into your small handbag. What's that? You ask. Your fan, Agnes says with a meaningful look. The ivory one with the painted birds. Of course, your fan. That seemingly innocent accessory was actually the Victorian woman's secret weapon. I found this amazing book at a museum gift shop, once that translated the Victorian language of the fan, and holy crap, it was basically Morse code with wrist flicks. Museum guides will tell you that women use these signals to communicate secretly with potential suitors across crowded rooms, all while looking perfectly proper. Remember what I taught you, Agnes murmurs as she arranges your hair. The fan is your voice, when your lips must remain silent. Agnes had been the one to teach you the secret language of the fan, knowledge passed down from lady's maid to lady's maid, a covert communication system developed by women who had no other way to express their true feelings in public. Drawing it across your cheek means... Agnes quizzes you. I love you, you respond automatically. Twirling it in the right hand. I wish to be rid of you. Resting it on your right cheek? Yes, left cheek. No. Agnes nods approvingly. Good. Use it wisely. You almost laugh at the absurdity of it all. Here you are, a grown woman, having to resort to elaborate fan movements just to say yes or no to a man. But that was Victorian dating for you. All about indirect communication, hidden messages, and plausible deniability. When the maid announces Mr. Blackwood's arrival at precisely 2 o'clock, you and your mother descend the stairs with practiced grace. He stands in the foyer, top hat in hand, looking every inch the proper Victorian gentleman. Mrs. Pembroke, Miss Pembroke, he bows. I've brought the carriage. Shall we? The handkerchief telegraph. The carriage ride to the botanical gardens is silent and awkward, with your mother sitting between you and Mr. Blackwood like a human chastity belt. When you arrive, Mr. Blackwood helps first your mother, then you down from the carriage, careful to touch only your gloved hand and only for the briefest moment. The gardens are beautiful, filled with exotic plants from across the British Empire. As you stroll along the gravel paths, your mother deliberately slows her pace, allowing you and Mr. Blackwood to walk slightly ahead, still within sight, but with the illusion of privacy. I must say, Miss Pembroke, Mr. Blackwood begins, you look particularly lovely today. Thank you, sir, you respond, keeping your eyes modestly lowered. I've been meaning to ask, do you enjoy music? I myself am quite fond of the pianoforte. Are these probing questions about shared interests, the Victorian equivalent of what's your favourite Netflix show? I do enjoy music, you reply, though I play only tolerably well. I should very much like to hear you play sometime, he says, and there's a warmth in his voice that wasn't there before. Is he actually interested, or just going through the motions? It's impossible to tell through the thick veil of propriety that covers every interaction. This is when the fan comes into play. As you walk, you open your fan and begin to fan yourself slowly. According to the secret code, this indicates I am married, which is obviously not true, but you're curious to see if Mr. Blackwood knows the language. His eyes flick to your fan, then back to your face, a slight frown creasing his brow. So, he does know the code. Interesting. You switch tactics, closing your fan and drawing it across your cheek. I love you. His eyebrows shoot up in surprise. Miss Pembroke, he says, his voice slightly strained. Are you feeling quite well? Perhaps the sun is too strong for you. You suppress a smile and switch signals again, this time resting the fan against your left cheek. No. Now he looks thoroughly confused. Perhaps we should find some shade, he suggests, clearly trying to make sense of your contradictory messages. The thing about the language of the fan is that it was never standardized. Different etiquette books publish different meanings for the same gestures. What meant "I love you" in one guide might mean "leave me alone" in another. It was a communication system designed for miscommunication. I once read this absolutely bonkers Victorian etiquette guide from 1870 that listed over 20 different fan signals, each with a specific meaning. The author claimed it was the secret language understood by all ladies of quality. But then I found another guide from the same year with completely different interpretations. No wonder everyone was confused. As you continue walking, your mother catches up, perhaps sensing that something unusual is happening. "Ah, the orchid house," she exclaims. "Shall we?" Inside the humid glass structure, exotic orchids bloom in a riot of colours. It's beautiful, but the real attraction is a moment when your mother becomes distracted by a particularly unusual specimen, and you find yourself momentarily alone with Mr. Blackwood behind a large palm. "Miss Pembroke," he says quietly, "I confess I'm having trouble interpreting your signals." So he does know the fan language. You feel a blush creeping up your neck. "I was merely cooling myself," you lie, closing your fan with a snap. "Of course," he nods, but there's a twinkle in his eye that suggests he doesn't believe you for a second. "Though if I may be so bold, if you wish to communicate with me, perhaps words would be clearer than other methods." Is he teasing you? That seems impossibly forward for a Victorian gentleman. But before you can respond, your mother reappears and the moment is gone. The fan wasn't the only secret communication system in the Victorian dating arsenal. There was also the language of flowers, where each bloom carried a specific message. A red rose meant love, of course. But did you know that yellow carnations meant, "You have disappointed me," or that striped carnations meant, "I cannot be with you"? As you exit the orchid house, a flower seller at the garden gate catches your eye. She's offering small posies for sale, little bunches of mixed flowers tied with ribbon. On impulse, you pause. "Would you like one, miss?" the woman asks, holding out a particularly pretty arrangement of daisies and forget-me-nots. Before you can answer, Mr. Blackwood steps forward. "Allow me," he says, purchasing the posy and presenting it to you with a slight bow. You accept with a curtsy, aware that this small exchange is laden with meaning. A gentleman giving a lady flowers is a significant step in courtship, and these particular flowers, daisies for innocence and forget-me-nots for true love, carry their own message. Did Mr. Blackwood choose this specific posy on purpose? Does he know the language of flowers as well as the language of fans? Or was it simply the prettiest one available? "How thoughtful, Mr. Blackwood," your mother approves, watching the exchange with hawk-like attention. And then there's the handkerchief, another seemingly innocent item loaded with secret meaning. You've tucked one into your sleeve, as every proper lady does. Dropping it accidentally on purpose is a classic move to attract a gentleman's attention. As you continue your walk, you deliberately let your handkerchief slip from your sleeve to the ground. Mr. Blackwood immediately notices. "Miss Pembroke, you've dropped your handkerchief," he says, bending to retrieve it. Now comes the crucial moment. How he returns it will indicate his interest. If he simply hands it back, he's being polite but not particularly interested. If he presses it to his heart before returning it, he's declaring his affection. Mr. Blackwood does neither. Instead, he tucks the handkerchief into his coat pocket with a smile. "I believe it's customary for a gentleman to keep such a token, is it not? With your permission, of course." Your mother looks like she might faint from joy. This is practically a declaration of intent in Victorian terms. "Yes," you manage to say, your face burning. "You may keep it." "Congratulations. You've just engaged in the Victorian equivalent of changing your Facebook status to "in a relationship." Look, I'm not making this stuff up. Victorian people wrote actual guidebooks on handkerchief flirting. I found this one journal from 1867 that published a whole system called the handkerchief telegraph. It had signals like drawing it across the lips meant "I desire your acquaintance," and letting it rest on the left cheek meant "no," while the right cheek meant "yes." The journal even warned that these signals should only be used at balls, parties, theatres, and on the street, but never in church, because apparently God draws the line at handkerchief flirting. The modern gaze on a brutal system. By the time you return home from the gardens, you're exhausted, not from physical exertion, but from the mental gymnastics required to navigate Victorian courtship rituals. Every gesture, every word, every glance has been calculated and analysed for hidden meaning. "Well?" your mother demands as soon as Mr. Blackwood has taken his leave. "What did you think of him?" "What can you say? That you spent most of the outing sending mixed signals with your fan just to see if he understood them? That you're still not sure if he chose those flowers randomly or with specific intent? That you now have one fewer handkerchief but no better understanding of the man who might become your husband? He seems kind, you offer, which is about as enthusiastic as you can honestly be. "Kind?" your mother exclaims. "He's perfect. Did you see how he kept your handkerchief and those flowers? I wouldn't be surprised if he speaks to your father by the end of the week." That sends a jolt of panic through you. So soon, but you've had exactly 2 proper conversations with the man. "Mother, surely that's too quick. We hardly know each other." She waves away your concern. "Nonsense. Your father and I were engaged after 3 meetings. That's how it's done in proper society." The Victorian timetable for courtship could be alarmingly fast by modern standards. Without the luxury of casual dating or getting to know someone over time, decisions had to be made quickly, often based on very limited information. Later that evening, as Agnes helps you prepare for bed, she notices your troubled expression. "Was the outing not to your liking, Miss Elelanena?" she asks, brushing out your hair. "Agnes, how can I possibly decide if Mr. Blackwood would make a good husband? I know nothing about him beyond his manners and his fondness for the pianoforte." Agnes sighs. That's why we have the language of fans and flowers and all the rest, to try to discover a person's true nature when society won't let you ask directly. "But it's also confusing," you protest. "I tried using the fan signals today, and I think I just confused him." Agnes can't help but laugh. The problem with secret languages, Miss Elelanena, is that not everyone reads the same dictionary. That night, as you lie in bed, you think about the day's events, the fan signals, the flowers, the handkerchief. You're a product on a shelf, and Mr. Blackwood is a potential buyer. He's a good match on paper, but you're still not sure if he's the right person for you. But in Victorian England, that wasn't a choice you got to make. You'll never know if he's the man he pretends to be, but you do know that you have to make a choice, and that choice will determine the rest of your life. Makes swiping left seem pretty easy by comparison, doesn't it? Gather round, little one, and settle in. Tonight, we're going to travel back in time to a world of lace, tea, and very, very straight spines. It was a place called the Victorian era, and in this world, manners weren't just about being polite. They were a bewildering and beautiful secret code. Imagine you're not a child in your comfy bed, but a young lady visiting the parlour of a distant, very proper aunt. You've been told to sit up straight, hands folded just so, and never let your back touch the chair. Why? Because in this strange world, posture wasn't just a detail, it was destiny. The unbreakable rule of the spine. You sit with your spine as straight as a ruler, your hands demurely folded in your lap, shoulders back, and chin gently tucked. You dare not lean back, for that would suggest laziness, and crossing your legs is simply scandalous. Stretching is for animals, not for proper ladies. In this time, your body spoke before you did. A straight spine showed discipline, poise, and good breeding. Bad posture was deeply suspicious, a sign of moral or spiritual failure. Mothers trained their daughters early, balancing books on their heads during sewing lessons. Some homes even had special posture-correcting chairs, wooden nightmares with no back support that forced you to sit upright for hours while embroidering something you would never use. This scrutiny followed you everywhere, from carriages to churches to ballrooms. Imagine walking into a party where every mother is secretly grading your vertebrae. The way you walked was just as important. You must glide, not march or shuffle. Your feet were meant to barely lift off the floor, toes pointed forward, with your heels making no sound. It's said that some girls were even fitted with backboards, stiff wooden devices strapped to the torso to correct curvature, which felt more like a medieval torture device than a fashion accessory. And here's where it gets especially odd. The obsession with posture wasn't just about beauty, it was a link to your health too. Physicians claimed poor posture squished your organs and ruined your femininity. Yet, despite the importance of a straight spine, corsets, those rib-crushing, lung-collapsing monstrosities, were still the norm. It's a special kind of irony to be judged for bad posture, while your entire torso is being cinched to the width of a baguette. You learn to keep your back rigid even when your emotions are not, practicing smiling without slouching, sitting without sinking, existing without offending. And you realize your spine wasn't just about bone alignment, it was about social alignment. Yours had better match theirs, or else. Generations of women grew up to suffer chronic back pain and pinched nerves, all in the name of respectability. Still, even in the face of absurdity, some found quiet resistance. They added extra padding to their dresses to look more upright or bravely, gloriously, just slouched when no one was looking. Because sometimes survival meant pretending to care about decorum while secretly giving your spine a break. The secret language of the fan. You're getting used to this, aren't you? Your posture is still perfect and your hands are folded just so, but your fingers twitch slightly, reaching for the small folding fan nestled beside your teacup. This fan isn't just for keeping cool, it's your only weapon in this parlour battlefield, and you wield it not for heat, but for communication. In the Victorian world, you weren't allowed to say what you actually thought, so you spoke with a fan, a delicate, fluttering, ostrich-feathered lie detector. This wasn't just dainty flirting, it was a full-blown code system, a tactical espionage tool disguised as an accessory. Speaking openly to a man was scandalous, but passing him a secret message with a flick of your wrist? Perfectly acceptable, as long as no one else caught it. The fan had a whole glossary. Dropping your fan meant we shouldn't be seen together. Snapping it closed quickly meant leave me alone. Resting it against your right cheek meant yes. The left cheek? No. Slowly drawing it across your eyes meant forgive me. And if you covered your heart with it, I love you. Subtlety was survival. Fans were the secret messages of their day. This was a form of power too. In a world where you couldn't vote or own property, a fan was your Morse code, your stylish defense mechanism. And fans were not cheap. A fine lace fan imported from France could cost a small fortune. So not only were you learning a secret language, you were expected to perform it with a fragile piece of artisan craftsmanship. Drop it, break it, and you weren't just clumsy, it was symbolic, like dropping your reputation right onto the parquet floor. The fan wasn't the only accessory under this heavy social microscope, but it was one of the few that gave women a quiet form of power. It's a clever, fluttering rebellion against the very rules it lived within. Women weren't allowed to speak their minds, but they could whisper with silk and feathers. And you wonder how many grand romances, secret affairs, or polite rejections happened without a single word spoken. Finally, picture this. You're at your last ball of the season. You see him across the room, the one you meant to send signals to all week. You try again. A glance, a flutter, a flick. Maybe he catches it, maybe he doesn't. But you hold your fan high, composed, unreadable, because even if you're boiling inside a gown with 37 buttons, you still know how to say everything without saying a word. The pocket crisis. You're getting used to the fan, sort of. At least it gives your hands something to do while you try not to commit the next major faux pas. Tonight's weird etiquette trap is hiding right beneath your skirts, or rather not hiding, because tonight we talk about pockets, or the infuriating lack thereof. You may think a pocket is just a place to stash your lip balm, but in the 1800s, pockets were a political statement. Here's the problem. You don't have any. Not real ones, not like the men do. In the 1700s, women used to have pockets, big ones too, tied around the waist under layers of skirts. But by the time Queen Victoria took the throne, dresses got tighter, skirts more sculpted, and the idea of cutting a hole in your carefully constructed gown just so you could carry your stuff. Outrageous, indecent even. A visible bulge where a lady stored her handkerchief was simply unthinkable. So you're left with nothing, or worse, you're told to carry a reticule, a tiny decorative handbag the size of a fig. It's dainty and holds approximately 3 things: a coin, a calling card, and the weight of your crushed autonomy. Historians still debate whether this shift was an accident of style or a deliberate act of control. Some suggest that by depriving women of a place to carry items, society kept them more dependent. After all, if you can't carry money, how far can you really go? And so here you are, invited to tea across town. You need a handkerchief, a comb, a key, but you have nowhere to stash it. You have to ask your brother, or worse, your maid. It's not just inconvenient, it's absurd. Men's clothing, by comparison, is a veritable storage system with waistcoat pockets, coat pockets, and secret inside pockets. They're practically portable filing cabinets. And what do you get? A decorative pouch tied with a ribbon, of course. But women, as they tend to do, got creative. Some kept money in their gloves, others stitched hidden pockets into petticoats. One particularly rebellious trick involved sewing tiny compartments inside corsets. The broader truth, however, was stark. You weren't trusted to carry your own stuff. You had no access, no freedom to act without preparation. It's worth noting that this nonsense didn't go unchallenged. As the century progressed, suffragettes made functional pockets for women, part of their broader demand for rights. "It has pockets" has become a modern war cry, a tiny victory shouted from department store fitting rooms. So tonight, as you fumble for your comb, take a moment to appreciate the sheer absurdity of it all. You live in a world where an entire gender had its carrying capacity surgically removed by a society obsessed with control disguised as fashion. And maybe, just maybe, you tuck a small stone into the hem of your gown, not for use, just to know it's there. The glove gauntlet. You're standing by the doorway, ready to step outside, but something's wrong. You forgot your gloves. Panic sets in, because in the Victorian world, showing up somewhere with bare hands isn't just awkward. It's practically a declaration of social war. Gloves weren't a fashion choice. They were armour. Etiquette demanded them, society enforced them, and scandal lurked in the fingers of the gloveless. Here's the deal. If you're leaving the house, you're wearing gloves. Visiting someone? Gloves. Shopping? Gloves. Attending a funeral, a wedding, a tea party, or a dramatic reading of Tennyson? Gloves. And not just any gloves. The fabric mattered, the length, the colour. Daytime meant light cotton or soft suede. Evenings demanded opera gloves, long, tight, and uncomfortable enough to make your fingers consider mutiny. There were rules, dozens of them. You remove your right glove when shaking hands. You never eat with your gloves on, but you don't remove them the moment you enter a room. You wait until the appropriate social cue, usually once your hostess has done it first. Historians still debate whether glove rules were about hygiene, modesty, or just a clever way to keep women busy and confused. To touch bare skin was intimate, scandalous even. A man touching a woman's hand without gloves could ignite a flurry of gossip. A gloved handshake was proper. A bare one was practically a marriage proposal. And yet, gloves weren't just barriers, they were stage props. A lady might accidentally drop one, knowing full well a gentleman would dive to retrieve it. That tiny scrap of fabric would become a relic, but fine gloves were expensive, and if a glove ripped in public, you'd better hope it was your non-dominant hand. Exposed knuckles were social suicide. Gloves were also associated with morality. "She's no better than a woman who walks around bare-handed," someone might whisper. Gloves became metaphors for purity and good breeding. To remove them in public was like peeling away propriety. It's no wonder gloves became a favourite prop in novels, usually right before the scandal chapter. So here you are, walking into your aunt's parlour 5 minutes late, hoping no one notices your gloveless state. You keep your hands close to your skirts, maybe you pretend to be chilled, but deep down, you know what the room is thinking. What else has she forgotten? Her modesty? Her morals? Her marriage prospects? It's ridiculous, and yet you feel it, that tiny anxiety, that flutter of shame, all from 10 fingers and no gloves. So next time you slip your hand into a warm glove on a cold morning, spare a thought for your Victorian counterpart. She wasn't just keeping her hands warm, she was keeping her dignity intact, one stitch at a time. The calling card gauntlet. You've survived the glove crisis, bravo, but don't relax just yet. You're now standing outside the home of a Mrs. Hartford Smith, the air thick with the scent of lavender and social anxiety. You're not here for fun. You're here for a calling, a ritual more complicated than chess, and about as enjoyable as doing your taxes in a corset. Welcome to the dizzying etiquette of Victorian visiting cards. These weren't just paper, they were your entire social resume, reputation, and personal brand distilled onto a little rectangle of cardstock. It had to be creamy, tastefully engraved, with no colours, no frills, and absolutely no scent. This was not a love note. This was diplomacy. And you're not just here to say hello. You're performing an elaborate social dance where one wrong move, a premature knock, a misfolded card, can doom your reputation for a full season. You reach into your tiny card case and extract a card with your gloved fingers. You hand it to the maid. Now, here's where it gets interesting. You don't get to walk in. Oh no. If you're not expected, you leave your card at the door, literally. This is leaving one's card, and it is Victorian for just checking in to make sure I'm still part of your acceptable friend tier. Sometimes you fold the top left corner to indicate you're calling in person and not just dropping by. A folded bottom corner meant condolences, an edge turned under meant congratulations. There were so many tiny signals on these cards they might as well have come with subtitles. If your card is accepted and you're invited in, congratulations. You now have to navigate the actual visit. This means entering a drawing room like you're made of lace and self-doubt, perching on the edge of a settee, and preparing for 15 minutes of intense performative civility. No more, no less. Staying too long is rude, leaving too soon is worse. You must speak politely about the weather or the Queen's latest headache while pretending you're not here purely out of obligation. You may not talk politics. You may not talk religion. You may certainly not talk about how bored you are. Laughter is allowed, but only gently, only with a handkerchief ready. The loud kind of laughter, the one that might suggest joy or confidence, is for taverns and men. Even the storage of these cards was strategic. Most genteel homes kept a silver tray in the entry hall where guests would deposit their cards, and because appearances were everything, some families would fluff up the tray with old cards to make it seem like they were more in demand than they actually were. That's right, people faked popularity using decorative litter. So as you step back into your carriage, tucking your gloves properly and faking a grateful smile, remember this. In the Victorian world, relationships weren't built with conversations. They were built with paper, polish, and precisely folded corners. And you'd better hope yours said exactly what you meant. The seating hierarchy. You've survived the calling card gauntlet, bravo. But don't relax just yet. You're now at a proper dinner party and everyone is gliding to their assigned seats like human chess pieces. Tonight, the battlefield is the dining room and your weapon is chair placement. Welcome to the world of seating hierarchy, where your social worth could be measured in inches from the host's elbow. First off, you do not choose your seat. No, the hostess does. She arranges the seating in advance with the seriousness of a military campaign. The head of the table is sacred territory. The host and hostess sit at opposite ends. To their immediate right and left are the guests of honour. If you're lucky enough to land a spot near them, congratulations. You're interesting this week. If you're seated near the foot of the table, well, you probably sneezed too loudly at the last garden party. This isn't just dinner, it's a social audit. Your seat tells everyone how the hostess ranks you. Closer means favoured, farther means forgettable. And if you're seated next to someone unpleasant, that's not an accident. It's a message. Now, if you're unmarried, your seating comes with even more layers. Young ladies are often placed strategically near eligible gentlemen, but not too close. That would be obvious. You're expected to sit, glide, and smile all at once. When your seat is pulled out, you must lower yourself in one fluid motion. No thuds, no shifting. Your back never touches the chair. Your ankles must remain side by side, hidden under your gown like a secret you'd never dare share. And here's a quirky detail. Women never sat down before the hostess. Ever. You wait until she sits, then you follow her cues. She sneezes. You politely bless yourself. When it comes to conversation, you're only supposed to talk to the person on your left during the first course, then the one on your right for the second. This alternates like a silent, formal dance. This rule was particularly stressful if you happen to be seated next to someone dreadfully boring, like Major Fortescue, who only talks about pigeons. But here's the kicker. This seating ritual was about stability. With so many rules in play, nobody could cause trouble without it being painfully obvious. A young man trying to flirt too boldly with a debutante? Impossible. He's stuck 3 seats down, forced to chat with her cousin. So you learn to endure, you smile, and you pretend not to notice the whispered comment about your gloves. You fold your napkin just right, and you wait, because in this room, silence is strategy, seating is status, and the dinner hasn't even started yet. The perilous stairs. The dinner is over, and your corset is staging a full-blown rebellion. But just when you think you've made it through the evening without social injury, your hostess rises and says, "Shall we take a turn about the drawing room?" Oh no. It's happening. You're going to have to walk in public with people watching, and worse yet, there are stairs. Victorian staircase etiquette was less about architectural navigation and more about avoiding moral collapse. Because somehow, even walking up a flight of stairs could be suggestive if you weren't careful. Here you are, a lady in a gown with 13 pounds of petticoats, and you must ascend with the grace of a duchess on a cloud. Behind you is a gentleman, and this is where things get delicate. In proper Victorian society, a man was never supposed to ascend the stairs directly behind a lady. That would mean he'd be at eye level with her ankles, or worse, her calves. And in this deeply paranoid social ecosystem, that was akin to gazing directly at her inner thoughts. Scandalous. Indecent. The result was that staircase protocol became weirdly specific. The man either had to hang back awkwardly, or if he was bold, go up first so he couldn't ogle anything he wasn't supposed to. It was like a duel of chivalry. After you? Oh, no, I insist, after you. I couldn't possibly. But I might see your shoes. Exactly. And speaking of shoes, those were another problem. Women's hemlines were long, but stairs made them treacherous. One wrong step, and the whole skirt could hike up just enough to flash a glimpse of stocking. So women learned to glide, holding their skirts just high enough to avoid tripping, but not so high that anything suggestive peeked out. You were expected to climb stairs like you weighed nothing, as if gravity itself admired your breeding and decided to ease up a bit. Descending stairs was a different kind of danger. Going down meant your face was visible, but you had to look at the steps, not the people watching. Eye contact while stepping down could be interpreted as boldness, and you never offered your hand unless you stumbled, in which case the appropriate gesture from a gentleman was to catch you and immediately apologize, as if he had done something wrong. It's all about appearances and control. But of course, rebellion existed. Daring women, the rebellious kind who didn't wait for a chaperone at every stairwell, who marched up stone steps without a single glance behind. These were often American women, scandalously independent. British society tolerated them, barely, but only because they were assumed to return home eventually. So back to you. Your foot touches the final stair. You've made it. Your skirt stayed in place. Your gloves didn't catch, and the gentleman behind you stared at the banister like his life depended on it. You step gracefully into the drawing room. One more etiquette obstacle conquered. The handkerchief's secret language. You've survived the stairs barely. But now you're perched once again on the edge of a too-small sofa, sipping tea that tastes like boiled patience. Conversation drifts around you, and you're politely pretending to care. But inside your sleeve, your hand is twitching. Tucked there is your secret weapon, your coded companion, your delicate, damp defender, the handkerchief. In Victorian society, a handkerchief wasn't just a square of fabric, it was a communication device. Folded, dropped, fluttered, or twirled, it sent messages more scandalous than the average dinner party ever dared to voice. The language of fans might have been dramatic, but handkerchiefs were low-key dangerous. Let's start with the basics. Everyone had one, some people had dozens. A lady never blew her nose audibly, that was considered ghastly. A gentle dab at the nostrils was permitted, barely, and only with grace. But beyond the sniffles, handkerchiefs were coded tools. Held neatly in the left hand, it meant, I'm awaiting your approach. Twirled absent-mindedly, I'm bored. Dropped by accident in front of a gentleman, that's no accident, that's bait. And if he picks it up and hands it back with a meaningful glance, well, now it's a courtship. Historians still argue how widespread this handkerchief language really was. Some claim it was just a literary flourish. Others believe women really did master these signals as a workaround to their voiceless roles. After all, when society says you can't speak first, you find other ways to get your message across. Lending someone your handkerchief was an intimate gesture, more intimate than a handshake. Lending it to a man meant something. Accepting one from a man was practically a contract. But sometimes it was weaponized. Think of the passive-aggressive sniff, the carefully timed dab of a dry eye during a dramatic reading. One woman reportedly caused a full household rift by accidentally leaving her lace-trimmed handkerchief on a rival's chair, embroidered with a monogram that wasn't hers. Handkerchiefs also had sentimental weight. They were kept in memory boxes, pressed between pages of love letters. They were handed down mother to daughter as tokens of femininity and restraint. They absorbed more than tears, they absorbed history. And then there was the mourning handkerchief, black-edged, starched, and thick with symbolism, used in funerals and periods of grieving that could last for years. So tonight, as you tuck your handkerchief back into your sleeve, carefully folded, scented with rosewater, and embroidered with just the right degree of subtlety, you know its power. It is protection, expression, and sometimes even defiance. And tomorrow, when you see him again, you just might drop it on purpose. The moral compass on your head. It's a new morning. A fresh breeze flutters the lace curtains. You, meanwhile, are locked in your bedroom in a state of absolute panic. Why? Because your hair is wrong. Victorian hair etiquette wasn't just about curls and combs. It was a full-time moral compass perched on your scalp. Your hair says everything before your mouth gets a chance to say anything at all. Hair was sacred, literally. It was tied to virtue and emotional state. Wild hair meant a wild woman. Perfectly coiled ringlets meant modest, well-raised, and just the right amount of repressed. You were expected to wear your hair up, always, unless you were under 13 or mourning. Letting your hair hang loose as a grown woman was reserved for the deeply ill or the artistically unhinged, and your hair had to be styled thoughtfully, tastefully, laboriously. Enter the pins. So many pins. You will spend at least half an hour each morning twisting your hair into a soft yet structured arrangement that looks effortless but requires a small engineering degree. Buns, braids, coils, and the occasional Grecian knot were all in fashion, but not too high. Showy, not too low, slouchy. Somewhere near the back crown of the head seemed safe. Of course, the materials mattered. Hairbrushes with natural bristles, tortoiseshell combs, ivory pins. Hair oil was a must, rose-scented preferably. A greasy sheen was in. Dry hair meant neglect, or worse, poverty. And let's talk about hair washing, or more accurately, the lack thereof. Weekly hair washing wasn't common because water was a production. Instead, they brushed a lot, 100 strokes a night. It wasn't just vanity. It was believed to stimulate the scalp, distribute oils, and prevent moral decay. The truly unhinged part? Hair as a keepsake. Victorians loved to gift locks of hair. Romantic partners exchanged curls tied with ribbon. Mothers snipped baby curls to keep in lockets. Mourning jewellery, bracelets, brooches, even full wreaths were made from the braided hair of the deceased. It's equal parts touching and morbid. And speaking of mourning, hair rules got even more complicated if you were grieving. For a widow in deep mourning, elaborate hairstyles were frowned upon. You wore your hair low and simple, possibly veiled. You were to look solemn, but still tidy. But here's the twist. Some women loved it. Hair was one of the few aspects of appearance they could control. It was private and public, yours but also society's, and within the tight confines of acceptable style, some found creativity. They developed signature twists, subtle ways to signal rebellion, or at least distinction. And there were outliers. Women who wore their hair shockingly short or scandalously loose. The papers fainted, but the next season the soft fringe bob became a quiet trend among younger ladies. So now, as you adjust the final pin, smooth the last flyaway, and glance one last time in the mirror, you breathe deep. Your hair is perfect, quietly dignified, not too interesting, not too plain. Just enough to earn polite nods from the other ladies, because in the end your hair doesn't just sit there, it speaks. And tonight it says, I know exactly what I'm doing, even if you absolutely, definitely do not. The perilous laugh. You've managed your hair, your gloves, your calling cards. You've climbed the stairs with grace and survived the dinner seating chart unscathed. You're practically royalty until you laugh. Just a little chuckle, a tiny well-earned burst of amusement at Lord Batten's absurd opinion that cucumbers are naturally spicy. And suddenly, the room shifts. Heads turn. Eyebrows twitch. A silence heavier than your bustle settles in. Because tonight, dear friend, you have committed the crime of improper laughter. Victorian women, you see, were expected to express amusement the way one might react to a particularly tasteful doily. With quiet, composed appreciation, anything louder than a mild titter, dangerous. Loud laughter was unladylike, undignified, and worst of all, vulgar. A lady should cover her mouth, not hide her face like a ninja, but delicately, as if catching a butterfly of amusement before it flutters away. The volume must stay low. The eyes can sparkle but not roll. The shoulders may shake slightly, but any indication of a real body involved in the laugh is unthinkable. Etiquette books offered actual instructions on how to laugh. You were to be mirthful, not boisterous, amused, not gleeful. No open mouths, no toothy grins, a smile that lingers. Charming. A giggle that echoes. Dreadful. It wasn't just laughter itself, it was who you laughed at. Making fun of someone above your station dangerous? Laughing with someone of higher status? Risky. Mocking anyone in the room? Utterly off limits. Most safe? Laughing at yourself as long as it was gentle and didn't imply actual self-awareness. Victorian men, by contrast, were encouraged to laugh. Roaring with laughter over port and roast beef was positively masculine. But women were to receive humour, not contribute to it. To laugh gently, or not at all. This disparity didn't go unnoticed. Some women turned it into an art. They mastered the mirror laugh, reflecting the amusement of their companions without betraying what they actually thought. It was emotional ventriloquism. You never laughed first. You never laughed louder. You laughed socially, not emotionally. But the real danger was in laughter that sounded like joy. You laugh loudly and people assume you are bold. Bold becomes brash. Brash becomes dangerous. And suddenly your name is being mentioned in the same breath as actresses, American heiresses, and worst of all, suffragists. It's no wonder that in some private gatherings, women's laughter was still restrained, but genuine. A brief reprieve where they could be human for 15 minutes between tea refills. So now, as you sit on that too small sofa, eyes sparkling but lips barely parted, you release a laugh. Soft, polished, palatable. It floats out into the parlour, lands gently on the floral rug, and disappears. You've passed. But just once, when no one's looking, you allow yourself a real one. Sharp, loud, joyful, and utterly forbidden. The houseguest's ballet. The parlour has quieted, the fire is down to a polite flicker, and the guests are beginning their elaborate goodbyes. But you? You're staying the night. A guest in someone else's home. A delicate situation requiring supreme grace, silent footsteps, and a well-packed overnight bag. Because in the Victorian era, being a houseguest wasn't just about showing up with flowers and a toothbrush. No, You were expected to perform a hospitality ballet, a precise, exhausting, utterly baffling set of rituals known as guest etiquette. Let's start with your arrival. You never just drop in. You send a note in advance requesting permission to visit. Once inside, you are no longer entirely human. You are a guest, which means you must be delightful, undemanding, and eternally grateful, even if the bed is lumpy and the wash basin smells faintly of mothballs. Your bags are taken up by a servant, and you're led to your room. There's a pitcher of water, a comb you probably won't use, and a bell pull cord that you are absolutely terrified to touch. What if you summon someone by accident? So you don't touch it. Then comes the guest book. Many homes kept one, a large leather-bound tome in which you are expected to write your name, date of arrival, and perhaps a sentiment like, "So honoured to be among such dear friends." Anything less than syrupy flattery marked you as ungrateful. You don't compliment the food too much. Doing so implies surprise, as if to say, "What delicious roast partridge." Sounds like, "I didn't expect this dump to serve edible game." So you keep it modest. So agreeable, you might murmur. Quite a pleasing texture. Food is not about pleasure, it's about civility. The rest of the day is structured. Morning walks, reading in the drawing room, maybe croquet if the host is feeling whimsical. And you are expected to participate. Declining an activity without a very good excuse is considered rude. And what if you want privacy? Hilarious. You have none. Your room may not lock, and Victorian houses, for all their grandeur, were often draughty and creaky. Everyone hears everything, so you tread lightly, cough discreetly, and do not slam doors under any circumstances. And when it's time to leave, you do not simply pack and go. You must say goodbye to every member of the household, leave a final note or small token for your hostess, and express hope that you have not disturbed the serenity of her home. There's even a belief that overstaying your welcome brings misfortune. 3 nights is civility, said one etiquette book. 4 invites fate. So you time your departure with surgical precision, and once you're gone, the host will definitely talk about you. She was punctual to breakfast. He walked too heavily. Her boots left a mark. These aren't just comments, they're votes on whether you'll be invited again. So, as you climb into the carriage, gloved hands folded, hat perfectly centered, you allow yourself a breath of relief. You didn't break anything. You didn't overstay. You didn't get caught humming in the hallway. You were the perfect Victorian guest, even if you secretly hate croquet. Letters, ink, and silent secrets. You've returned from your house visit, gracefully declined a 3rd slice of boiled pudding, and your hair still smells faintly of someone else's lavender soap. But before you can collapse in a grateful heap, you remember you've got to write letters, and not just any letters, proper ones. Because in the Victorian world, communication wasn't just about saying the right thing, it was about writing the right thing with the right ink on the right paper, folded the right way, sealed with the right wax, and scented with the appropriate level of tragedy. Your writing paper must be cream or pale blue. A subtle monogram is acceptable, provided it doesn't scream, "I designed this myself with dreams of grandeur." Envelopes, ungummed. You seal them with wax, of course. And yes, there is a correct wax for every occasion. Bright red is romantic, black wax is for mourning, blue is for friendships. Your ink must be black or dark blue. Violet is flirtatious, and green ink, as we've noted, is for rebels and poets. But now you add your secret ingredient, scent. Some women dip their letter paper in rose water or orange blossom before drying it flat between books. Others dabbed perfume on a separate sheet and slipped it into the envelope as a scented decoy. A letter that smelled faintly of lavender was familial. One dabbed with violet was romantic. Gardenia, bold, jasmine, suggestive, musk. Now you're playing with fire and everyone knows it. And then there was what you wrote. Victorian letter writing was emotional ballet. Every line had layers. "I trust this finds you in good health" could secretly mean, "I've been thinking of you at odd hours." You might reference an object. "The book you lent me has been a fine companion," as a code for, "I'm not entirely over our last conversation." The letters could be read aloud, so whatever you wrote needed to withstand public scrutiny. Many women even drafted their letters on scrap paper first, editing for tone and margin alignment. And once your letter is perfectly crafted, you fold it in thirds, tuck it into the envelope with the writing facing inward, then melt a bit of sealing wax and voila. One socially safe communication ready to be delivered. But what about letters you receive? You wait. Responding too quickly makes you look overeager. Waiting too long makes you seem aloof. The sweet spot? 3 to 5 days. One fringe favourite technique involved warming the envelope slightly before delivery, enough to awaken the perfume and ensure it hit the recipient right in the nostalgia. Of course, the risk of discovery was high. Imagine your brother accidentally warming your letter to dry a raindrop, and suddenly learning that you think Lady Bovington's wig is shaped like a confused hedgehog. So tonight, as you tuck your final folded missive into its envelope, seal it with wax and whisper, "Please don't fall into the wrong hands," you feel a flicker of satisfaction. Because in a world where speaking too freely was dangerous, writing became an act of quiet rebellion. And your rebellion smells faintly of lavender and heartbreak. The chair-warming scandal. You've written your letters, and you're back in the drawing room for another polite social gathering. The tea is tepid, and Lord Pelham is once again attempting to explain why the Crimean War was good for morale. You need to sit down desperately, but you can't. Not in that inviting armchair by the hearth, because it's still warm. Welcome to the bizarre social phenomenon of chair warming, and why Victorian women had to be hyper-aware of where and when they sat. In polite society, sitting in a warm seat, especially one recently vacated by a man, was considered vaguely inappropriate. Why? Because it suggested intimacy, bodily heat, presence. In a world that flinched at the sight of an uncovered wrist, the lingering warmth of someone's posterior was just too much. This rule, of course, applied mostly to women. Men could plop into any seat without much thought. But for women, the etiquette was layered, awkward, and full of potential peril. Say a gentleman had been sitting in the window seat. He stands up to fetch tea. The seat is now vacant, yes, but it is also contaminated. You, the observant and ever so proper lady, must now wait. How long? Enough for the chair to cool, a few minutes at least. It gets worse. If you do sit down, and someone notices, a raised eyebrow, a glance between friends, a note made for future gossip. Miss Trenworth sat in Sir Edmund's chair, still warm, shameless. Historians are divided on whether this rule was widespread or more of a fringe fixation, but either way, the implications were real. A woman's relationship to furniture wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. Even the act of claiming a chair was tricky. You were supposed to hover politely, perhaps float by, and happen to rest when someone insisted. And if a gentleman offered you a seat, you were to hesitate, protest once, maybe twice before accepting. Too eager, and you risked seeming forward. The goal was to appear as though you were doing him a favour by allowing yourself to be seated. And let's not forget how you rose from a chair. Not too fast, you might seem startled. Not too slow, you might seem reluctant. You pressed your gloved hands on the armrests, leaned slightly forward, and rose as if lifted by an invisible string. If your skirts swished, fine. If anything got caught in the upholstery and required tugging, ruinous. So now, back to you. You're hovering, carefully scanning the room. That chair by the fire is empty, but it was occupied moments ago by Captain Frobisher. You decide to wait, casually perch on the edge of a nearby footstool, and smile serenely. You are neither so bold as to invade a man's warmth, nor so fragile as to collapse without cushioning. You're a woman of elegance, of restraint, of internalized seating anxiety. And when another chair opens, fully cooled, socially neutral, with just the right balance of form and fabric, you glide into it with the poise of someone who spent her entire life preparing for this exact moment. The parlour tightrope. You've claimed your seat with all the grace of a duchess on a cloud and managed to fold yourself into it without flashing a single petticoat ruffle. Your posture is textbook, but now you've reached the most treacherous terrain in the Victorian household, the parlour. This wasn't just a sitting room, it was the social proving ground, the place where reputations were built, broken and embroidered over. As you cross the threshold into the parlour, you're already being observed. You must greet the hostess first, always. A simple nod won't do. You need a slight curtsy and a few pleasantries like, "What a lovely arrangement of rhododendrons." Then if the room is full, you must select your spot carefully. The parlour is socially zoned like a chessboard. Near the fireplace is where the older ladies gather. By the piano, young hopefuls. Near the window, dangerous, too exposed to scrutiny. You find a spot on a love seat that already has a chaperone, a friendly matron perched on one side. Perfect. You're immediately seen as respectable and not lurking for flirtation. Then begins the parlour dance. Small talk. Not real talk, not opinions, not honesty. You might discuss the weather, the most recent charity fete, or a recent sermon. But the second you drift toward controversy, say the Irish question, or even a bold thought about Mrs. Montgomery's new bonnet, you've overstepped. You nod more than you speak. You laugh gently. You speak only when spoken to, unless you're introduced and prompted with a question. It's not a conversation, it's a performance of harmony. And then there's the piano, the parlour's crown jewel and its greatest curse. If you play, you must pretend not to want to. The hostess may say, "Won't you favour us with a piece?" You must demur at least once. "Oh, I'm out of practice," but refuse a third time and you risk looking like a killjoy. When you finally sit, you play something modest, a light waltz, a Chopin prelude, something to say, "I am educated, but not. I'm auditioning for the Paris Conservatoire." The most dangerous subject of all? Men. You do not bring up a gentleman unless he's royal, dead, or both. Even referencing your own brothers or cousins too frequently could be seen as a subtle way of parading connections. And heaven forbid you mention a gentleman's appearance. One innocent remark about someone's shoulders, and suddenly you're branded as bold. So tonight, as you sip your imaginary tea and nod along to a very tedious discussion about corn yields, you know exactly how to survive. You ask polite questions, you feign interest, and when someone dares to say something real, you pause, smile, and offer them a lifeline. How about those rhododendrons this year? The ankle scandal. So you've learned how to sit, speak, walk, and even blink like a lady of impeccable Victorian decorum. But what if, in a moment of unguarded impulse or gasp, curiosity, you wanted to speak to a man alone, in private? Well, you couldn't. Welcome to the unnerving realm of the Victorian chaperone system, where no interaction between a proper young lady and a gentleman could be left to chance. If you wanted to talk to a man, you needed a witness, a buffer, a walking, breathing embodiment of social caution. Your chaperone, your mother, your older sister, or a vigilant aunt, had one job: to observe, redirect, and if necessary, intervene. Unsupervised conversations between unmarried men and women were potential ticking scandals. A 5-minute chat on a park bench could fuel weeks of gossip. A walk in the garden without a third party. You may as well start planning the wedding or the exile. The rules were stiflingly clear. If a gentleman called upon you, he did so in the presence of your family. If he wrote to you, the letter was often read aloud by a third party first. If you met him in public, you could only speak if introduced, and never for longer than it takes to comment on the weather. If he invited you anywhere, the answer was always a polite no. This system either protected women or imprisoned them. Some say it gave women the protection they needed in a society obsessed with appearances. Others claim it was a method of control, ensuring every interaction could be monitored and judged. A lax chaperone was just as scandalous as an unattended girl. If Mrs. Southworth allowed her niece to speak to the curate for more than 10 minutes, people started asking, why? But the system wasn't entirely without cracks. Some clever women used their chaperones as cover. You might plan a walk through the park, and while your chaperone pauses to admire swans or lament the decline of moral poetry, you exchange quick words or even a handkerchief with your suitor. This was risky, thrilling, and often the only way to advance a relationship beyond polite weather commentary. So tonight, as you imagine yourself in your prim walking dress, you glance to your left. There she is, your chaperone, watching, waiting, ready to protect you or prevent you, depending on the moment. And you realize every step you take is shadowed not by danger, but by a very polite, very firm, very unshakable presence. The dance card and the waltz. You've withstood the chaperones, the language of lace, and the perilous world of conversational restraint. But now it's time to enter the true Colosseum of Victorian etiquette, the ballroom floor. In the Victorian era, a dance wasn't just a dance, it was a statement, a strategy, a public declaration of alignment and interest. It began with the dance card. You arrive at the ball and you're handed a small, dainty booklet. Inside are numbered slots for each dance of the evening. Your job to fill them with gentlemen's names, but not just any names. Your dance card had to balance social obligation with subtle ambition. Family, friends, dull cousins, and your chaperone's favourite vicar all required a slot. Leave them out, and someone would definitely notice. This isn't Tinder. You're not allowed to switch partners mid-dance, and heaven forbid you accept 2 dances from the same man before you're engaged. Dancing twice with a man in a single evening meant something. It might not scream engaged, but it certainly whispered interested, and whispers travelled fast. Now, let's talk about the waltz. Ah, yes, the waltz. That slow, rotating, mildly scandalous embrace that changed the Victorian dance scene forever. When it first arrived, it caused absolute panic. Why? Because it involved touching, real, gloved, breath-sharing proximity. Before the waltz, dances were more like synchronized promenades. But the waltz, that was chest to chest, well, corset to coat, arms around waists, a brief yet blazing bubble of intimacy right in the middle of a chandelier-lit battlefield. At first, only married couples or daring debutantes attempted it, but as the years progressed, it became socially acceptable, with supervision. Your chaperone still watched from the sidelines like a hawk in pearls. The trickiest part was ending the dance. At its conclusion, your partner bowed, you curtsied, and he escorted you to your seat. Public delivery was mandatory. You exchanged the briefest of pleasantries, and then he vanished, or circled back to hover just enough to be noticed. And sometimes a girl might simply not dance. Maybe she was ill, or mourning, or making a silent protest. In those cases, she might sit quietly, her card blank, her gaze neutral. But that came with its own peril, the dreaded wallflower label. Wallflowers were women who, for whatever reason, weren't asked to dance. Once labelled, it was hard to shake. So tonight, as the string quartet strikes up a familiar tune, you glide onto the floor. Your gloves are tight, your card is full. You take your partner's hand, you step, and for a few dizzying moments beneath the gaslight and gilded cornices, you're not just a young lady surviving etiquette. You are dancing on the edge of danger, one turn at a time. The dinner table minefield. By now, you've successfully navigated the drawing room, decoded glances, waltzed with restraint, and survived the judgmental stares of every embroidered sofa in sight. But all of that fades in comparison to the most terrifying arena in Victorian society, the dinner table. This wasn't just about eating, it was about performing a flawlessly choreographed act of elegance while covered in lace and surrounded by gravy-based landmines. You're seated between 2 gentlemen, strategically chosen by the hostess, and your job for the next 2 hours is to make small talk, eat without chewing audibly, and avoid committing one of the many dining taboos. Let's begin with the napkin. It's placed delicately on your lap, not tucked into your collar. You unfold it quietly and place it across your lap, as if it just drifted there by accident. Wipe your mouth discreetly. Never wipe your face. Never, under any circumstance, drop it. Dropping your napkin could mean disaster. If you bend down to grab it, you risk flashing a glimpse of ankle. Then, the cutlery situation. There is so much of it, aligned like battalions, and the rule is simple: work from the outside in. But in the panic of the moment, your mind goes blank. You glance to your left, you glance to your right, you copy them, you survive. But the real horror is the food itself. Victorian cuisine could be elaborate, unidentifiable, or just aggressively slimy. Jellied eels, brain cutlets, and boiled calves' feet were all fair game, and you must eat it politely. Take small bites, chew with your mouth closed. Never speak with food in your mouth. Never salt your food before tasting it. That implies you doubt the cook's ability, which is grounds for exile. If you dislike something, just leave it quietly. Making a face or pushing it aside will earn you a permanent slot on the scandal roster. And then we have the sauce conundrum. Sauces were everywhere, and they were dangerous. They dripped, they splashed, they betrayed. One flick of the wrist, and suddenly your elbow-length gloves are covered in a horrific tureen. Historians still debate whether the overuse of sauces was a culinary preference or a societal tactic to test composure under fire. After all, if you can maintain elegance with hot goose fat dribbling across your crinoline, you can handle anything. The end of dinner, even that was regimented. The hostess would give a subtle signal and the ladies would rise, leaving their napkins behind. They would sweep out of the room like a bouquet of whispering ghosts, heading for the drawing room while the men remained for cigars and politics. Once in the drawing room, you resumed your ladylike duties, polite conversation, quiet sighs, and pretending you definitely didn't almost sneeze into a salmon mousse. Mourning, the gown of grief. The soup is settled, the lace gloves are peeled away, and you've survived yet another night of social survivalism. But now comes the most emotionally exhausting performance of all, one that requires no fans, no forks, no coy glances. Mourning. Because when someone in your life dies in Victorian England, you don't just grieve, you enter a rigid, multi-phase mourning ritual that could dominate your clothing and your social life for up to 2.5 years. Let's say your cousin, or heaven forbid your husband, passes away. Your sadness is expected, but your mourning behaviour must be flawless, starting with your wardrobe. You don't simply wear black, you wear mourning black, matte, non-reflective, often dyed with logwood. No jewellery, unless it's jet or made from human hair. Yes, hair. Mourning jewellery often featured woven locks from the deceased, worn in rings, brooches or lockets. It's romantic, maybe, and undeniably creepy. For a widow, this period of deep mourning lasts at least 1 year and a day. During that time, your wardrobe is basically a fashion prison. Black bombazine, crepe veils, jet jewellery, and bonnets so heavy with symbolism they could double as tombstones. No visiting, no attending social functions, no music, no smiling too much, and definitely no dancing. After a year, you might shift into half mourning. This meant you could wear grey or lavender, but not both at once. You might rejoin society in small, controlled ways. Even in grief, the etiquette was competitive. One woman wore mourning for 3 full years after her husband's death, earning her the nickname the Eternal Widow. Another was criticised for returning to church only 6 months after her brother's passing. Historians still argue whether this elaborate grief etiquette offered comfort or cruelty. Some say it gave structure to overwhelming emotion. Others believe it was designed to police women's behaviour, turning natural sorrow into a theatre of endless denial. Men had mourning rules too, but theirs were simpler, shorter, and, surprise, far more forgiving. A black armband, a dark suit, and after a few months life resumed. Women, however, were expected to carry the visible burden of grief like a full-time job. To forget to mourn correctly could jeopardise not only your social standing, but also your moral reputation. A cheerful widow? Untrustworthy. A laughing mourner? Indecent. But through all this there was power in mourning, the power to set boundaries, to opt out of the marriage market, to claim space in a world that rarely allowed women to define their own roles. In the crepe and jet and silence, some found freedom, albeit cloaked in sorrow. So tonight, as you imagine yourself in the flickering candlelight of a darkened drawing room, your dress is heavy, your veil drawn. Your grief is visible, curated, and officially sanctioned. You sip your tea in silence, and for once, nobody expects you to smile. The veil of night. And now, finally, you let the veil fall away. Not the mourning kind, but the gauzy, imaginative one we've worn together tonight. The corsets unclasp, the gloves slip off, the ballroom hush fades. You're no longer balancing teacups, decoding fan signals, or avoiding eye contact. You're just here, still breathing. The strange rules, the endless posture checks, the swirling dance of Victorian expectations. It all melts into a soft, distant fog, like a parlour mirror gently fogged over, hiding sharp edges, smoothing the outlines of a world that was at once impossibly rigid and absurdly theatrical. Let your shoulders sink into the mattress now. Feel the tension ebb away like the final notes of a string quartet echoing down the hall. No more etiquette, no more whispered judgments, just you, weightless, drifting through velvet dark stillness. The night deepens, the world outside hushes. The bustle of 1,000 silent rules, the creak of morning gowns, the clink of a spoon against bone china, all of it fades. What's left is quiet, safe, simple. You are no longer performing. You are resting. Let yourself surrender to that slowness, that hush. Let your breathing stretch out like a curtain being drawn. You've survived the unspoken code of an entire era. Now it's time to sleep, not under the rules of society, but beneath the calm of your own soft quiet. You did well tonight. Sleep deeply now, knowing the world will still be there in the morning, just a little less corseted.